Tonight we drift into the slow, dark waters of the Nile, where the first lights of ancient Egypt flicker against black riverbanks and long stretches of silent desert. The air smells faintly of wet mud and cooling reeds. Somewhere beyond the darkness, frogs pulse in the shallows while insects circle low over the water. A narrow boat creaks softly against its rope tether. The river moves almost without sound. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in tonight, perhaps share where you're listening from, what your local time is, and which corner of history keeps calling you back after midnight. Now, dim the lights. You stand beside the Nile nearly 7,000 years ago. Long before pyramids rise from the desert and long before kings carve their names into stone. Egypt does not exist yet. There are no pharaohs, no great temples, no monuments polished white beneath the sun. There is only the river. It is difficult to explain how completely the Nile shapes human life here. Without it, this land would simply be another stretch of unforgiving desert. The wind would move across empty stone and sand without interruption. But every year the river floods. Dark water spills across the banks and leaves behind rich black soil thick as wet clay. People begin gathering beside it because they have very little choice. You watch small communities emerge carefully along the floodplains. Families shape huts from mud and bundled reeds. Smoke drifts from cooking fires at dusk. Fish dry on woven racks beneath the sun. Children chase one another barefoot along damp riverbanks while adults study the water with permanent caution. The Nile gives life generously, but never gently. One year the floods arrive too weakly. Crops fail. Hunger settles into every conversation. Another year the waters rise too high and swallow entire fields beneath brown currents. People survive by learning patience first. Confidence comes much later. In the cool hours before sunrise, farmers walk silently into the fields carrying wooden hoes across their shoulders. The earth beneath their feet feels soft and heavy after the flooding season. Seeds disappear into the dark soil. Wheat and barley begin pushing upward beneath the heat of the Egyptian sun. The rhythm of life becomes tied completely to the river's moods. Flood, planting, harvest, waiting. Again and again, you notice how quickly memory becomes sacred in places like this. People remember which flood brought famine, which season brought disease, which family vanished after the river changed course unexpectedly during the night. Stories pass between generations beside cooking fires while old men stare thoughtfully into the darkness beyond the reeds. Nobody writes these stories down yet. For now, history survives only in breath and memory. The Nile Valley also offers something rare in the ancient world: predictability. Beyond the fertile banks, deserts spread outward like natural walls. To the north lies the Mediterranean Sea. To the east and west stretch harsh, barren lands. Egypt is protected almost accidentally by geography itself. But protection does not mean comfort. You walk through one settlement during the hottest part of afternoon. Heat presses against your skin like heavy cloth. Flies gather constantly around baskets of fish. Sweat darkens linen clothing almost immediately. A woman grinds grain patiently using a flat stone while her child sleeps nearby in the shade. Her hands move with a practiced exhaustion. Nobody here imagines they're building one of history's greatest civilizations. They're simply trying to survive another season. And honestly, that may be one reason ancient Egypt lasts so long. It begins without grand ambition. The earliest villages remain small for centuries. Some people hunt birds in the marshes using throw sticks. Others fish with bone hooks or woven nets. Potters shape simple jars from river clay and leave fingerprints unknowingly preserved for thousands of years. That detail always feels strangely intimate. A fingerprint in drying clay, one distracted touch from somebody whose name disappeared before writing even existed. You can almost picture the moment. Perhaps the potter wipes sweat from their forehead. Perhaps they hear a child crying nearby. Perhaps they are simply tired. The object survives longer than the memory of the person. As generations pass, villages slowly grow wealthier beside the river. Agriculture allows food storage. Food storage allows specialization. Some people spend less time farming and more time crafting tools, jewelry, or ceremonial objects. Trade begins stretching farther along the Nile. Boats drift north and south carrying pottery, stone blades, animal skins, and beads made from shells. The river becomes Egypt's first road, and roads change everything. You notice subtle differences between communities in the north and south. In Upper Egypt, farther upriver toward the south, settlements develop strong local rulers and distinct traditions. In Lower Egypt, near the broad northern delta, life spreads outward across marshlands and branching waterways. They are connected by water but divided by identity, at least for now. As populations grow, conflict appears naturally. Land matters. Water access matters even more. Some graves begin containing weapons beside the dead. Defensive walls rise around certain settlements. Leaders emerge gradually, often through strength, persuasion, or control over food supplies. Power arrives quietly at first, then it stays. You sit beside a burial pit one evening as mourners place objects beside the dead. Clay pots filled with grain, simple tools, beads, a carved figurine smoothed by human hands. The grave is shallow compared to later royal tombs, but the meaning already feels familiar. The dead might still need these things. That belief becomes one of Egypt's deepest foundations. Death here is never viewed as simple disappearance. Even in these early centuries, people sense continuity between the living and the dead. The desert itself encourages such thinking. Bodies buried in dry sand often remain naturally preserved. Skin tightens but survives. Hair remains visible. Features linger strangely intact. Imagine discovering that by accident. Imagine lowering someone into the earth and later realizing the desert has held their shape almost lovingly. It must have felt unsettling, sacred, even. Slowly, spiritual ideas deepen around preservation and the afterlife. Rituals become more careful. Burials become more elaborate for important individuals. Status follows people into death. Human beings have always carried inequality with them, even into eternity. The nights along the Nile remain extraordinarily beautiful. That never changes. You look upward and see stars scattered with impossible clarity across black sky. The river reflects fragments of moonlight through drifting reeds. Somewhere far away, a dog barks once and then falls silent. An old fisherman sits near the shore repairing a net by firelight. His face is lined deeply from sun exposure. He says very little. Most people here do not waste words unnecessarily. Survival teaches economy in everything, even conversation. But you sense something growing in this valley now. Not yet an empire, not yet greatness, more like accumulated gravity. Villages pulling slowly toward larger identities, rituals becoming systems, leaders becoming kings. The Nile keeps carrying everything forward, season after season, century after century. And somewhere ahead in the darkness, enormous stone monuments already wait invisibly beneath unborn generations. Morning arrives slowly across the Nile Valley. Pale light spreads over the water while mist clings low above the reeds. Fishermen push narrow boats into the current before the heat becomes unbearable. In nearby fields, farmers bend silently over young barley shoots wet with river dew. Smoke rises from cooking fires in soft grey columns that flatten beneath the warming sky. The world still feels small here, but power has started gathering shape. You move forward through centuries almost without noticing at first. Villages become towns. Towns become regional centres ruled by ambitious local chiefs. Mud brick walls rise higher. Storage houses grow larger. Ceremonies become more formal. Wealth accumulates unevenly along the riverbanks, and with wealth comes competition. The Nile connects everyone, but it also forces proximity, and proximity creates friction. Upper Egypt in the south develops strong warrior rulers whose symbols feel sharp and deliberate. Falcon imagery appears often. Certain kings wear tall white crowns that rise elegantly above the forehead. Meanwhile, Lower Egypt in the north forms its own identity among the marshes and branching waterways of the delta. Their rulers favour the red crown, broad and distinct against the sunlight. 2 lands, 2 crowns, 2 visions of order. You can feel the tension growing long before war finally arrives. Boats move faster now along the river carrying grain, stone, copper tools, ceremonial objects, and rumours. Rumours travel quickest of all. A southern ruler has conquered another settlement. Northern leaders are forming alliances. Soldiers are gathering near disputed river territory. Nobody sleeps comfortably during uncertain years. In one crowded riverside settlement, you sit near a brewer pouring thick beer into rough clay cups. The drink is warm and sour but nourishing. Workers laugh tiredly nearby while flies gather around baskets of onions and fish. Conversation drifts constantly toward politics now, though nobody would call it politics yet. People simply talk about survival. Which ruler keeps roads safer? Which leader taxes too heavily? Which nearby town disappeared after refusing tribute? The ordinary citizen always notices instability first. Eventually one southern king rises above the others. Historians still debate details surrounding him. Some later records call him Nama. Others associate him with a ruler remembered as Menes. The surviving evidence is incomplete, blurred by myth and royal propaganda, but most agree that sometime around 3100 BCE, Upper and Lower Egypt unite beneath one ruler for the first time, not peacefully. Unification rarely happens peacefully. You stand among soldiers beside the river during one campaign. Leather shields creak softly. Copper blades catch pale sunlight. Sweat darkens linen kilts before the morning fully warms. Men glance toward the north with nervous expressions they try carefully to hide. Most armies throughout history are built from ordinary people who would rather remain home. That truth never changes. The battles themselves pass quickly compared to the long years of tension preceding them. Certain cities submit willingly. Others resist. Blood darkens irrigation canals. Bodies disappear beneath river currents. Survivors adapt because survival leaves little room for sentiment. And then suddenly Egypt exists. One kingdom, one ruler, one sacred identity stretching along the Nile. The symbolism matters enormously. The united king now wears both crowns together, red and white combined into a single royal emblem. It is not merely fashion, it announces cosmic balance, order imposed upon division, harmony replacing chaos, at least officially. Real life remains more complicated. Many regions still distrust central authority. Local loyalties remain powerful. Travel along the Nile is slow. Communication depends entirely on boats, runners, and memory. Yet something profound has changed psychologically. People begin imagining themselves as part of a larger story. That idea alone reshapes history. The king becomes more than political leader. He exists somewhere between human and divine. Egyptians do not yet fully worship pharaohs as gods in the later sense. But sacred kingship already surrounds the throne. The ruler is believed responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the fragile balance holding the universe together. Truth, harmony, order. Without proper rule, Egyptians fear chaos may return. Floods might fail, crops might die, society itself could fracture back into violence. You notice how deeply this belief affects daily behaviour. Ceremonies become increasingly important. Ritual precision matters. Officials carefully record harvests and distribute resources. Hierarchies solidify. Authority reaches farther into ordinary life each generation. Bureaucracy, strangely enough, becomes one of Egypt's greatest inventions. Not the most glamorous invention, admittedly. Nobody carves heroic poems celebrating grain inventory officials. Still, empires depend heavily upon people who count things properly. You enter an early administrative building near the new royal centre at Memphis, strategically positioned where Upper and Lower Egypt meet. The air inside smells faintly of clay dust and damp papyrus. Scribes sit cross-legged recording deliveries with reed brushes and black ink. Writing has arrived. At first the symbols remain simple and practical. Lists, goods, names, taxes. But language preserved visually changes civilization forever. Memory no longer relies entirely upon spoken repetition. Orders travel farther. Histories survive longer. Kings understand quickly that written authority feels permanent, even when it isn't. Outside the administrative halls, ordinary life continues with familiar rhythms. Farmers still rise before dawn. Potters still shape clay beside the river. Mothers still soothe crying children through hot, sleepless nights. Yet the scale of society keeps expanding around them. Large royal tombs begin appearing near desert edges. Early pharaohs want death handled carefully now. They build massive burial complexes filled with objects for the afterlife. Furniture, jewellery, food, weapons, cosmetic jars still carrying traces of perfume oils, and servants. Some early royal burials include sacrificed attendants meant to accompany kings into eternity. The practice does not last forever, but its existence reveals something unsettling about early power structures. A ruler's importance outweighs individual lives completely. The dead king must continue ruling beyond death. You walk quietly through one burial preparation at dusk. Priests burn incense that smells sweet and heavy in the warm air. Mourners whisper prayers while workers carry grave goods into underground chambers lit by flickering oil lamps. Sand crunches softly beneath sandals. Nobody speaks loudly near the dead. Fear and reverence blend together here. That blending becomes distinctly Egyptian. The Nile itself remains strangely calm through all these transformations. Boats continue sliding silently across dark water beneath moonlight. Hippos still emerge unpredictably from the reeds, enormous and dangerous despite their almost comical appearance. Crocodiles bask along muddy banks with ancient patience. Nature does not particularly care about kingdoms, and yet Egyptians begin reading divine meaning into every aspect of the landscape around them. The Nile flood becomes sacred rhythm. The sun's daily journey becomes spiritual metaphor. The desert represents death and danger while fertile black soil symbolizes life itself. Even geography acquires theological meaning. You feel the civilization becoming more self-aware now, more confident, more organized. Egypt starts looking inward and outward simultaneously, inward towards spiritual continuity, outward toward expansion, trade, and monument building. The first dynasties establish patterns lasting thousands of years. Royal succession becomes sacred theatre filled with uncertainty behind ceremonial calm. Elite families gather influence. Priests accumulate authority beside kings. Scribes quietly preserve the machinery holding everything together. And somewhere in the distance, stoneworkers already begin experimenting with larger constructions. Human ambition rarely stays modest for long. The desert west of the Nile feels different at dawn. Cooler. Still. The wind moves softly across open stone and carries fine sand against your ankles. Far behind you, the river valley already wakes with human noise. But out here silence dominates everything. It presses gently against the ears. Ahead, workers drag heavy limestone blocks across packed earth, while overseers shout measured instructions through the pale morning light. Egypt has entered the age of stone dreams. By now, centuries have passed since the first unification. Dynasties rise and settle into tradition. Royal authority hardens into something immense and almost unimaginable. Pharaohs no longer merely rule Egypt, they stand at the center of cosmic order itself. Their survival after death becomes a national concern, and so the tombs grow larger. At first, the royal dead rest beneath flat rectangular structures called mastabas, built from mud brick and later stone. These tombs spread low across the desert like silent benches beneath the sun. But human ambition, once awakened, rarely stops expanding. You arrive during the reign of King Djoser around the 27th century BCE. His architect, Imhotep, studies construction with restless intelligence. Historians later remember him as engineer, priest, scholar, and healer. In time, he becomes something close to legendary. For now, though, he's simply a man standing in dust, trying to build something nobody has attempted before. The step pyramid rises gradually above Saqqara in stacked layers of pale stone. Workers haul blocks using sledges over dampened sand, while teams chant together to keep rhythm. The sound carries strangely across the open desert. Wood creaks, ropes strain, bronze tools scrape against limestone. Sweat darkens every piece of linen. You watch one labourer pause briefly to stretch his aching shoulders. His hands are rough and cracked white from stone dust. He looks upward toward the unfinished pyramid with a mixture of pride and exhaustion that feels instantly recognisable across thousands of years. Most monuments are built by tired people. That truth gets lost sometimes beneath the grandeur. The pyramid itself feels astonishing against the flat horizon. Not polished yet, not perfect, but undeniably monumental. Egypt has discovered architecture as spectacle. Stone now communicates power more effectively than armies alone ever could. The message is simple. This kingdom intends to endure forever. As generations pass, pyramids become increasingly ambitious. Pharaohs experiment constantly with angles, internal chambers, structural stability, and symbolic meaning. Some projects partially collapse. Others remain unfinished after rulers die unexpectedly. Human trial and error sits quietly beneath every ancient wonder. Then comes Giza. You approach the plateau during the reign of Khufu, whom later Greek writers call Cheops. The Great Pyramid is still under construction, and the scale feels almost difficult for the mind to accept. Ramps stretch upward beside the growing structure. Thousands of workers move continuously through organised labour crews carrying stone, water, tools, and supplies. The air smells of dust, sweat, wet clay, and distant cooking fires. Contrary to old myths, these workers are not slaves in chains. Most are labourers supporting the state through seasonal service, especially during Nile flooding when farming temporarily pauses. They receive food, shelter, beer, medical care, and social status connected to royal projects. That does not make the work easy. Far from it. You walk through nearby workers' villages at evening. Bread bakes over open ovens while exhausted men soak sore feet in shallow water basins. Someone laughs hoarsely at a joke lost beneath surrounding noise. Another worker coughs persistently from inhaled stone dust. Physicians treat injuries using linen bandages, honey, herbs, and practical experience. Civilization often advances through aching muscles. A young stone hauler sits quietly outside his sleeping quarters, turning a small amulet between his fingers. He misses home upriver. His wife recently gave birth while he worked here beneath the desert sun. News travels slowly. He has not seen the child yet. History rarely pauses for private longing. Still, private longing exists everywhere inside history. The Great Pyramid consumes enormous resources. Quarry operations expand. Boats transport granite from Aswan far to the south. Administrators track supplies obsessively. Scribes record labour assignments with careful precision. Entire systems of taxation and logistics strengthen around royal construction. The pyramids are not merely tombs. They are demonstrations of organisational power, and they work, even unfinished, The structures dominate imagination. Foreign visitors arriving by river must have stared upward in stunned silence as white limestone casing stones reflected sunlight brilliantly across the desert edge. The effect would have appeared almost supernatural, especially at sunrise. You stand atop the plateau one early morning while pale gold light spills across the pyramids and slowly reaches the green Nile valley below. For several quiet moments, the entire landscape seems suspended between worlds. Fertile life on one side, endless desert on the other. Egyptians intentionally place royal tombs within that threshold. Life and death remain neighbours here. Religious ideas surrounding the afterlife grow increasingly sophisticated during these centuries. The king's soul or ka must survive eternally. Tombs include food offerings, furniture, clothing, games, perfumes, and ceremonial objects intended for continued existence beyond death. Even humour travels into eternity sometimes. Archaeologists later uncover board games placed carefully inside burial chambers. Somebody worried the dead might become bored. Honestly, it feels strangely comforting. Priests perform rituals daily within funerary temples connected to the pyramids. Incense smoke curls upward through cool stone halls, while chants echo softly against polished surfaces. Offerings of bread, beer, meat, and fruit sustain the royal spirit. As long as rituals continue properly, cosmic order remains stable, or so Egyptians hope. Yet beneath all this confidence lies quiet anxiety. The very scale of pyramid building reveals fear as much as certainty. Kings build enormous monuments because death still unsettles them deeply. No amount of divine language fully removes human vulnerability. You notice that vulnerability during Khufu's reign particularly. Later writers portray him harshly, sometimes as cold and demanding. Accounts differ. Royal propaganda rarely preserves flaws honestly. Still, immense projects always create strain. Taxes increase. Labour demands expand. Local officials accumulate power. Ordinary Egyptians likely feel both pride and resentment simultaneously. Empires often inspire mixed emotions in the people maintaining them. At night, the plateau changes character completely. Fires flicker near worker camps beneath enormous stars. The unfinished pyramid looms black against moonlit sky, vast and strangely silent now after daytime noise fades. Wind moves softly through scaffolding poles. Somewhere nearby, a man sings quietly in a tired voice before sleep. You sit listening beside the desert edge. The song feels small against the monument, but somehow more human, and perhaps that is the strange secret of ancient Egypt. Beneath every colossal structure waits an ordinary person carrying water, missing family, nursing sore hands, fearing death, and hoping tomorrow's labour might matter. Stone preserves the kings, but memory belongs equally to the workers. The tomb is cooler than the desert above it. That is the first thing you notice as you step through the narrow entrance passage cut deep into stone. Outside, sunlight blazes against the cliffs west of the Nile. Inside, the air feels still and dry, carrying faint traces of dust, oil smoke, and something older that refuses easy description. A scribe bends over fresh plaster nearby, carefully painting black symbols across the wall with a reed brush. The dead are learning to speak. By the height of the Old Kingdom, Egypt has become a civilization obsessed with continuity. Not only political continuity or royal succession, though those matter deeply, the greater concern is spiritual survival. Existence itself must continue beyond death. Memory must endure. Names must endure even longer. To disappear entirely would be unbearable. You move through burial chambers belonging not only to kings now, but increasingly to nobles, priests, administrators, and wealthy officials. Status spreads outward from the royal court like ripples through water. More people want tombs. More people want rituals. More people want eternity arranged carefully in their favour, and writing changes everything again. At first, sacred texts belong almost exclusively to pharaohs. The earliest pyramid texts appear carved inside royal burial chambers during the late Old Kingdom. Their purpose is protective and practical at once. They guide the king safely through the dangerous landscape of the afterlife. The afterlife, unfortunately, it's not imagined as restful simplicity. It requires passwords, spells, navigation, and divine approval. Even eternity comes with bureaucracy. You watch priests recite funerary words beside a newly sealed tomb while incense thickens the chamber air. Their voices echo softly from stone walls painted with scenes of harvests, hunting expeditions, servants preparing food, and boats gliding along the Nile. The dead wish to carry familiar comforts with them. That desire feels timeless. One wealthy official commissioned scenes showing musicians entertaining guests beneath flowering gardens. Another fills his tomb with images of cattle, granaries, and servants carrying bread and beer. The logic is sympathetic magic. If represented properly in art and text, these things may continue nourishing the soul forever, or at least that is the hope. The emotional core of Egyptian religion often feels surprisingly practical. People are not chasing abstract salvation. They want recognizable existence to continue. They want warm bread, familiar voices, family closeness, cool water during hot seasons. They want tomorrow, even after death. You spend time among the scribes responsible for preserving these desires. They belong to a growing, educated class whose influence quietly expands across Egyptian society. Literacy remains rare and prestigious. Scribes train for years memorizing symbols, practicing brushwork, and learning administrative precision. Their work shapes civilization invisibly, inside one dim administrative room. You hear the soft scratching of reed pens against papyrus while sunlight filters through woven reed screens overhead. Young apprentices sit cross-legged, repeating characters again and again until their wrists ache. One boy fights sleep constantly during afternoon lessons. His teacher notices immediately. Teachers have always possessed supernatural awareness for exhausted students. The boy straightens awkwardly while nearby scribes hide restrained amusement. There is tenderness inside these ordinary moments that history often overlooks. Most scribes never become wealthy. Their lives revolve around records, taxes, inventories, letters, and ceremonial texts. Yet literacy grants stability rare in the ancient world. A good scribe avoids back-breaking field labour. He works indoors. He gains social respect. Some even rise into powerful government positions. Egypt increasingly runs on written organisation. Taxes recorded, harvests counted, workers assigned, offerings tracked, prayers preserved. Civilization becomes paper and ink as much as stone. You notice something else changing too. The afterlife slowly becomes less exclusive. During earlier centuries, elaborate eternal survival centered primarily around kings. But over time, religious ideas spread downward socially. Nobles adopt royal funerary traditions. Officials imitate elite burial customs. Ordinary people participate however they can afford. Human beings imitate power instinctively. A modest craftsman cannot build a pyramid, but he might place protective amulets beside a loved one. A farmer cannot commission elaborate tomb paintings, but he can whisper prayers for safe passage into the next world. Hope adapts to circumstance. One evening you sit beside a funeral procession, moving slowly toward the western desert. Mourners wear linen garments streaked with dust from the road. Women sing grief songs in wavering voices while professional mourners cry loudly near the coffin. The emotional display feels public but sincere. Death remains deeply communal here. The coffin itself is simple painted wood. Inside rests a middle-aged woman who spent most of her life grinding grain beside the Nile. Her hands show years of repetitive labour. Tiny wrinkles remain visible near her eyes. Her family places bread, onions, beer jars, and a favourite necklace inside the tomb. Small things matter enormously after loss. A child quietly slips a carved toy beside the body while adults look away politely. That detail lingers with you. Egyptian burial customs preserve emotional intimacy beneath all their ceremony. Archaeologists later discover letters written to dead relatives asking for help, forgiveness, or intervention in family disputes. Some people continue speaking to the dead because grief refuses clean endings. Honestly, grief has probably always ignored official theology. Meanwhile, Egypt itself grows richer and more complex. Trade networks extend farther south into Nubia and east towards Sinai. Expeditions bring back copper, gold, ivory, incense, exotic animals, and rare woods. Elite households become increasingly luxurious. Fine linen grows softer, jewelry grows more elaborate, and inequality grows quietly beside prosperity. You see it clearly during harvest season. Wealthy estate owners inspect overflowing granaries while nearby labourers ration food carefully through uncertain years. Farmers remain vulnerable to flood failures despite Egypt's outward confidence. One poor harvest can still unravel entire communities. No civilization fully escapes fragility, even at its strongest. Ancient Egypt depends completely upon the Nile behaving properly. There are signs now the strain is building beneath the surface. Regional governors gain increasing independence. Royal authority stretches thinner across distant territories. Massive pyramid projects drain resources steadily. Climate fluctuations begin affecting flood patterns. Most people do not recognize historical turning points while living through them. Life simply becomes harder gradually. You stand atop a cliff overlooking the Nile at sunset while funeral smoke drifts faintly upward from distant tomb chapels. The river glows copper beneath fading light. Boats move slowly homeward carrying fishermen, workers, grain, and exhausted silence. Below you, inside hundreds of tombs, painted figures continue eternally baking bread, rowing boats, feeding cattle, embracing spouses, and speaking names aloud against oblivion. The Egyptians understand something profound already. Human beings fear being forgotten almost as much as they fear death itself. Night settles softly over the royal residence at Memphis. Oil lamps flicker along painted corridors while servants move quietly between shadowed rooms, carrying folded linen, wine jars, trays of figs, and sealed letters, somewhere deeper inside the palace. Musicians play a melody so faint you almost mistake it for wind. Beyond these walls, official inscriptions celebrate kings. Inside them, women shape dynasties. Ancient Egypt remains deeply hierarchical and unmistakably patriarchal in many ways. Men dominate government offices, military command, priesthoods, and royal succession. Yet Egyptian women possess social freedoms unusual for much of the ancient world. They can own property, inherit wealth, initiate divorce, manage businesses, and appear before courts under their own names. Power here often moves indirectly, quietly, through family rather than formal office. You begin noticing how frequently royal stability depends upon women whose voices survive only partially in the historical record. Queens produce heirs. Royal mothers protect vulnerable successions. Noble women maintain alliances between powerful families. Priestesses guard sacred rituals tied closely to legitimacy itself. Without them, kingdoms fracture faster. One queen in particular rises gradually from shadow into extraordinary visibility. Her name is Hetepheres, mother of Khufu, builder of the Great Pyramid. Much of her life remains uncertain, but fragments survive through tomb goods and inscriptions. Archaeologists later uncover her furniture buried carefully near Giza. A gilded chair, elegant carrying equipment, cosmetics preserved in alabaster containers, objects intimate enough to make her suddenly human. You imagine her sitting patiently while attendants braid scented oils into her hair before some ceremony now lost entirely to time. Perhaps she worries about court politics while pretending calm composure. Perhaps she simply feels tired. Royal life has never guaranteed emotional peace. Inside palace compounds, the atmosphere remains controlled but tense. Linen curtains stir softly in warm night air, carrying the smell of lotus perfume and burning incense. Servants lower their eyes carefully when nobles pass. Conversations stop abruptly whenever unfamiliar footsteps approach. Everybody watches everybody else. That too never changes across history. Marriage among royal families serves political survival first. Love may appear occasionally, but stability matters more. Queens are expected to embody dignity, fertility, sacred continuity, and restraint simultaneously. It is an impossible standard, naturally. Women are often blamed for instability they never created. You see this especially during succession crises. When kings die unexpectedly, royal mothers sometimes become essential guardians for young heirs. Their authority may not appear openly in official propaganda, but behind ceremonial language they negotiate loyalties, calm rival factions, and preserve continuity long enough for the next ruler to secure power. Soft influence can determine the fate of empires. One afternoon you enter a temple complex where elite women serve religious roles connected to Hathor, goddess of motherhood, beauty, music, and love. Sistrums shake rhythmically during rituals while incense thickens the air beneath painted ceilings. Female singers perform hymns in low repeating harmonies that echo through stone halls. Religion gives women visible authority unavailable elsewhere. Not complete equality, certainly, but visibility. Priestesses maintain temple wealth, oversee ceremonies, and participate in sacred performances believed essential for divine favour. Their presence reminds you that Egyptian spirituality depends heavily upon balance between masculine and feminine forces. Creation itself requires duality. Ordinary women, meanwhile, carry the civilization quietly upon their backs. You spend time in farming villages where wives rise before dawn to grind grain, brew beer, weave linen, care for children, and manage households during husbands' absence. Their labour never receives monumental architecture. Still, nothing functions without it. A woman kneels beside a grinding stone during midday heat while sweat darkens loose strands of hair against her neck. Her daughter sits nearby threading beads silently. Flour dust covers both their hands, outside. Goats bleat impatiently near the doorway. The scene feels simple, but civilizations are built mostly from repeated ordinary scenes. Marriage contracts become increasingly formalized during these centuries. Property rights matter deeply. Some surviving legal records reveal women negotiating financial protections carefully. Others file complaints in court against dishonest relatives or abusive treatment. Egyptian society expects women to remain socially respectable. Certainly, but it also recognizes them legally as individuals. That distinction matters more than many people realize. You notice affection preserved occasionally in surviving tomb art too. Husbands and wives appear seated closely together beneath painted garden scenes. One woman rests her hand gently upon her partner's shoulder. Another smells a lotus flower while her children stand nearby. These moments feel almost startlingly tender, not because ancient people lack tenderness, but because historical memory often strips emotion away from them. One royal woman eventually breaks entirely beyond expected boundaries. Her name is Kentkaus. Historians still debate her exact role, but inscriptions suggest astonishing authority. Some believe she may have ruled as king herself, or acted as regent wielding near pharaonic power. The evidence remains incomplete. Ancient history often survives like shattered pottery reconstructed carefully from fragments. Still, the fragments matter. You walk through her funerary complex near Giza during late afternoon. Wind pushes sand softly against stone walls while workers finish decorative carvings nearby. Her titles carry unusual weight. Mother of Kings, possibly king herself. The ambiguity feels important somehow. Egypt occasionally allows flexibility during moments of necessity. Capability can briefly outrank convention when survival demands it. Yet women also remain vulnerable constantly to reputation and rumour. Court politics can become vicious. Fertility pressures weigh heavily upon queens. Producing heirs determines security. Failure invites replacement, humiliation, or erasure from influence. The emotional strain must have been enormous. Imagine living always beneath scrutiny. Imagine understanding that your body carries political consequences for an entire kingdom. At night, noble households become quieter and strangely reflective. Lamps burn lower. Courtyard pools mirror moonlight between palm shadows. Somewhere a mother hums softly to a restless child while distant temple drums pulse through the darkness. You sit listening near an open balcony overlooking the Nile. The river smells fresh after evening cooling. Boats drift silently beneath stars just as they did thousands of years earlier, before kingdoms existed at all. And inside nearby rooms, women continue shaping Egypt invisibly through marriage. Motherhood, ritual, negotiation, endurance, intelligence, and survival. History remembers the stone faces of kings, but dynasties often survive because someone behind those kings understands people better than monuments ever could. The harbour smells of salt, fish oil, wet rope, and cedar wood newly unloaded from foreign ships. Gulls circle overhead, screaming into the morning wind while dock workers haul cargo across creaking wooden gangways. The Nile Delta spreads wide behind you, green and fertile beneath pale sunlight. But ahead lies the open sea. For many Egyptians, that horizon feels deeply unsettling. The river's familiar, predictable, intimate. The sea belongs to strangers, yet Egypt cannot remain isolated forever. Its growing wealth demands resources the Nile Valley cannot provide alone. Copper for tools and weapons, cedar for ships and monumental buildings, gold, incense, ivory, lapis lazuli, exotic animals, oils, resins, fine textiles. The kingdom hungers constantly now, and hunger expands maps. You travel northward with a trading expedition preparing to cross the eastern Mediterranean. Sailors move confidently around the vessel, tightening rigging and inspecting cargo, while nervous passengers pretend not to notice the restless waves striking the hull. The ship smells heavily of pitch, damp linen, and old wood warmed by sun. One sailor spits overboard and mutters a quick prayer beneath his breath. Even experienced crews fear the sea a little. Honestly, they have good reason. Egyptian river travel is relatively gentle. The Nile flows predictably northward, while prevailing winds often allow easy sailing south. But open water behaves differently. Storms arrive without warning. Currents shift unpredictably. Shorelines disappear entirely for terrifying stretches. You feel the ship rise and fall beneath your feet as land gradually shrinks behind you. Nearby, merchants sit protectively beside sealed cargo jars containing grain, beer, papyrus, and crafted goods intended for exchange abroad. Trade is business, certainly, but also diplomacy. Every voyage carries political consequences. Foreign relationships always do. As Egypt grows wealthier during the late Old Kingdom and early Middle Kingdom periods, contact with neighbouring cultures increases steadily. Traders encounter Levantine port cities crowded with unfamiliar languages and customs. Expeditions push south into Nubia where gold mines shimmer beneath brutal desert heat. Others travel east towards Sinai searching for turquoise and copper. The world becomes larger with every successful return voyage, and larger worlds complicate identities. You arrive eventually at Byblos along the Levantine coast, one of Egypt's most important trade partners. The harbour buzzes with movement unlike anything along the Nile. Foreign merchants argue loudly over prices while donkeys push through crowded streets carrying timber and pottery. Smoke from cooking fires mingles with sea air and unfamiliar spices. Egyptians abroad often react with mixed fascination and discomfort. Foreign cities feel chaotic compared to the ordered rhythms of the Nile. A royal Egyptian official walks carefully through the market, trying not to reveal his unease. He dislikes the noise, dislikes the smell of too many bodies pressed together, dislikes bargaining openly instead of relying upon formal hierarchy. Still, he needs cedar desperately. Egypt lacks large native timber. Monumental construction consumes enormous quantities of wood for ships, roofing, scaffolding, sledges, furniture, and burial equipment. Lebanese cedar becomes especially prized. Its scent alone carries prestige. You watch labourers unload long cedar trunks from ships while scribes record quantities carefully onto papyrus scrolls. The wood smells sharp and clean beneath the coastal sun. Nearby craftsmen already discuss how the timber might become palace beams, royal barges, or elite coffins. Trade transforms imagination as much as economy. Foreign ideas drift slowly into Egypt alongside material goods. Artistic styles change subtly. New technologies appear. Different religious symbols become familiar through repeated contact. Egyptians remain deeply proud of their own civilization, often viewing outsiders as less refined. But curiosity still slips through the cracks. Human beings are naturally porous. No culture stays untouched forever. You travel southward later with a caravan heading towards Nubia. The journey feels harsher immediately. Desert winds scrape against exposed skin while pack animals stumble through rocky terrain, carrying trade goods and water supplies. Guards remain alert constantly. These routes can become dangerous without warning. At night, the desert cold arrives suddenly and without mercy. Men wrap themselves tightly in wool blankets while fires burn low against the darkness. One young guard admits quietly that he misses the smell of the Nile mud after flooding season. Another jokes dryly that at least crocodiles are easier to predict than desert bandits. The laughter sounds tired but genuine. Nubia occupies a complicated place in Egyptian thinking. To the south lies immense wealth, especially gold, but also powerful neighbouring cultures capable of resistance and independent strength. Trade relationships shift constantly between cooperation and military pressure. Empires rarely separate commerce from control. Egyptian expeditions build forts farther south along the Nile during later centuries. Officially, these secure trade routes. Unofficially, they project dominance. Soldiers stationed there endure isolation, heat, insects, and long separation from families upriver. One evening you sit beside a frontier garrison where exhausted soldiers eat bread and dried fish beneath buzzing torchlight. Their sandals are cracked, their linen stained permanently with sweat and dust. Most speak little during meals. Distance changes people slowly. Some marry local women eventually. Others adopt foreign customs despite pretending otherwise in official reports. Borders create blending as much as division. Meanwhile, Egyptian ships also begin venturing toward the mysterious land of Punt, likely somewhere near the Horn of Africa. Accounts describe incense trees, exotic animals, ebony, gold, and fragrant resins used in temple rituals. The expeditions feel half commercial and half mythic. Few journeys capture imagination like distant trade voyages. You stand aboard one returning vessel as sailors unload incense resin, still carrying rich, sweet fragrance despite months at sea. Monkeys screech nervously from wooden cages, while curious crowds gather near the docks. Children point excitedly at foreign animals they have never seen before. For a moment the harbour feels almost festive. Trade brings wonder alongside anxiety, but wealth flowing into Egypt also sharpens inequality further. Elite households grow increasingly luxurious while labourers remain vulnerable to poor harvests and taxation. Imported perfumes scent noble banquets, while farmers worry quietly about next season's flood levels. Civilizations often become most dazzling shortly before strain begins showing. You notice subtle tension everywhere now beneath outward prosperity. Regional governors gain confidence through growing local wealth. The central government depends heavily upon constant resource management. environmental fluctuations begin affecting agricultural stability more seriously. Yet from the outside, Egypt still appears eternal, stable, confident, blessed by the gods themselves. Tonight you sit beside the Nile watching merchant boats drift slowly beneath moonlight toward distant cities. The river smells cool and alive after the day's heat. Somewhere nearby a trader counts foreign silver by lamplight, while imagining profits not yet realized. And beyond the dark horizon, more strangers already move toward Egypt carrying unfamiliar goods, unfamiliar gods, and futures nobody here can yet imagine. The river arrives late this year. At first, the change feels almost too subtle to notice. Farmers stand along the Nile banks, watching the water carefully while pretending not to worry. The flood always comes. It has always come. Egypt depends upon that certainty so completely that questioning it aloud feels dangerous, almost disrespectful. But the water rises slowly, too slowly. You walk through fields where cracked earth spreads beneath brittle stalks of failed grain. Dust lifts easily in the wind now. Goats chew listlessly at dry reeds near shrinking irrigation channels. Conversations grow shorter inside villages. People conserve energy when hunger approaches. And hunger is approaching. The old kingdom, once so confident beneath its pyramids and divine kings, begins unravelling through pressures both environmental and political. Historians still debate exact causes. Climate fluctuations likely weaken Nile flooding over several decades. Crop yields decline. Regional officials gain independence while royal authority weakens. Empires rarely collapse in a single dramatic moment. Usually they thin gradually at the edges first. You feel it everywhere now. Administrative systems still function officially, but strain shows through the cracks. Tax collectors travel with armed escorts. Grain shipments arrive late or not at all. Local governors increasingly prioritize their own territories instead of the distant royal court. People notice these things long before official records admit them. In one village south of Memphis, you sit beside a family sharing a painfully small evening meal. The bread feels coarse from poor grain quality. Beer has been watered down to stretch supplies. A mother quietly pretends she's not hungry so her children can eat more. Parents have always mastered that particular performance. Outside, the air smells dry instead of fertile. Even the Nile seems quieter somehow. The Pharaoh still exists. Of course. Ceremonies continue. Priests perform rituals faithfully inside temples scented with incense and polished oils. Royal officials issue decrees praising divine order. But the emotional bond between ruler and people begins weakening, because divine kings are expected to protect stability, and stability is disappearing. You travel northward through settlements where abandoned houses collapse slowly into mud and dust. Some families leave entirely searching for better flood conditions elsewhere along the river. Others remain because they lack alternatives. The silence inside partially deserted towns feels especially haunting. A dog wanders through one empty courtyard sniffing overturned pottery while wind rattles loose reeds overhead. Laundry still hangs forgotten from the line near the doorway. Whoever lived here likely expected to return at first. Perhaps they even intended to, as resources grow scarce. Violence increases naturally. Tomb inscriptions from local officials boast less about ceremonial duties now, and more about providing food during famine years or protecting communities from raiders. Authority fragments into regional survival. Human morality becomes complicated during scarcity. One provincial governor proudly records that he fed the hungry during difficult years. Another celebrates military strength and harsh discipline. Both probably believe themselves necessary. Meanwhile, the Great Pyramids remain standing above the desert, immense and indifferent. Their polished limestone surfaces still catch sunlight brilliantly while ordinary people struggle below. The contrast feels almost cruel now. Monuments outlive the confidence that created them. You stand at Giza during late afternoon watching thin clouds drift above the pyramids, while nearby workers repair damaged causeways with limited supplies. The atmosphere has changed since earlier generations. Less triumph, more maintenance. Civilizations eventually spend more energy preserving old greatness than creating new greatness. That realization carries quiet sadness. Religious anxiety deepens alongside material hardship. Egyptians have always linked cosmic balance to political order and proper ritual. So when famine spreads and instability rises, people naturally question whether Maat itself has weakened. Has the king failed the gods? Have the gods abandoned Egypt, or has humanity simply misunderstood the universe entirely? No clear answer arrives. You visit a temple where priests continue offering bread, incense, and prayers despite dwindling resources. Oil lamps flicker weakly against painted walls. The air feels heavy with smoke and exhaustion. One elderly priest recites rituals from memory because fresh papyrus has become too expensive to waste. His voice trembles only slightly. Faith often survives longest among tired people. Outside the temple gates, however, public frustration grows harder to hide. Workers complain openly about taxes. Farmers resent grain seizures by officials. Local rulers increasingly behave like independent kings within their own territories. Egypt fractures not only politically, but psychologically. The idea of eternal centralized order begins fading. You travel south into Upper Egypt where powerful nomarchs, regional governors, rule almost autonomously now. Their courts imitate royal traditions on smaller scales. They commission tombs, sponsor local projects, command private militias, and cultivate loyalty directly from surrounding communities. Some govern responsibly, others become brutal opportunists. History rarely sorts people neatly into heroes and villains during collapse. One evening you stay inside the household of a provincial administrator who genuinely tries protecting his district from famine. He keeps careful grain records, reduces certain taxes temporarily, organizes irrigation repairs personally beneath punishing heat. Still, he cannot solve everything. Later that night, you overhear him speaking quietly with his wife while lantern light flickers across the room. He worries constantly now about food shortages, about political rivals, about whether the next flood season will destroy whatever fragile stability remains. His exhaustion feels painfully modern. Beyond elite households, ordinary Egyptians adapt however they can. Families barter possessions for grain. Craftsmen abandon specialized trades to farm. Some turn toward banditry. Others cling stubbornly to routine because routine itself becomes emotional survival. A woman still sweeps dust from her doorway each morning despite the town slowly emptying around her. That detail stays with you. Human dignity often survives through small repeated actions. As central authority collapses fully, Egypt enters what later historians call the First Intermediate Period. The name sounds tidy. The reality feels anything but tidy. Rival kingdoms emerge in north and south. Warfare becomes more common. Trade declines. Infrastructure deteriorates. And yet life continues. Children still laugh occasionally beside the river. Couples still marry. Boats still drift beneath moonlight. People still bury their dead carefully. Civilization does not vanish overnight simply because governments weaken. In fact, some local cultures become surprisingly vibrant during these fractured centuries. Regional art styles flourish. Literature grows more emotionally reflective. Certain texts speak openly now about suffering, injustice, and uncertainty in ways earlier royal propaganda avoided. Collapse strips away illusions sometimes. You sit beside the Nile late one evening while dry wind moves softly through brittle reeds. Far away, distant funeral chants carry faintly across dark water. Above you, the stars remain impossibly clear, unchanged by famine or politics or human fear. And somewhere beyond the horizon, future rulers are already preparing to gather Egypt together again from these scattered pieces. But tonight the kingdom feels tired. Very tired. The southern city of Thebes wakes before sunrise. Temple courtyards fill slowly with priests carrying oil lamps through blue pre-dawn darkness, while fishermen push boats into the Nile beside sleeping palms. Donkeys shuffle through narrow streets beneath baskets of grain. Somewhere nearby, a child cries briefly and then falls silent again. The air smells fresh after the night's cooling, touched faintly by river mud and wood smoke. Egypt is rebuilding itself here. After generations of political fragmentation and famine, rulers from the south begin restoring centralized authority during what historians later call the Middle Kingdom. The process is neither quick nor peaceful. Rival kingdoms still distrust one another deeply. Old wounds remain open. Entire regions remember hunger too clearly to trust promises easily. But exhaustion can become its own kind of motivation. People eventually grow tired of chaos. You travel north with soldiers loyal to Mentuhotep II, the Theban ruler who gradually reunifies Egypt around 2050 BCE. His armies move carefully along the Nile, reclaiming territory through warfare, negotiation, and strategic marriages. The campaigns are smaller than later imperial conquests, yet emotionally heavier somehow. These men are not chasing glory, they are chasing stability. Their shields bear scratches from years of conflict between Egyptian rivals. Linen armour hangs stiff with sweat and dust. Campfires burn low at night while veterans speak quietly about ruined harvests and abandoned towns they passed during earlier campaigns. Civil war leaves long memories. One older soldier cleans his spear beside the riverbank while explaining that he once fought for a northern ruler before switching loyalties after famine reached his village. He does not sound ashamed, mostly tired. History often forces ordinary people into impossible choices. When Thebes finally secures dominance, relief spreads gradually through the Nile Valley. Not celebration exactly. Relief, taxes stabilize. Irrigation systems receive repairs. Trade routes reopen cautiously. Royal authority returns, though changed now by memory of collapse. The new rulers understand something earlier kings forgot. Power depends upon competence as much as spectacle. You notice the difference almost immediately in official language. Middle Kingdom inscriptions still praise pharaohs extravagantly, of course, but there is greater emphasis now on practical leadership. Feeding the hungry, maintaining order, protecting borders, administering justice fairly. The trauma of famine still shadows everything. One inscription from a provincial governor proudly declares that nobody in his district starved during difficult years. The statement carries emotional weight precisely because starvation remained recent memory. You walk through restored farming communities where irrigation canals are being dredged again by coordinated labour crews. Mud sticks thickly to workers' calves beneath the hot sun. Supervisors shout instructions while scribes record attendance carefully on papyrus sheets protected from dust. The work feels exhausting but hopeful. That combination matters. Civilizations recover through infrastructure long before they recover emotionally. The Nile floods improve during these years as well, bringing renewed agricultural confidence. Fields green beautifully beside the river. Granaries begin filling again. Markets grow crowded with traders selling onions, fish, linen, pottery, beer, and fresh bread still warm from clay ovens. You stand inside one busy marketplace at midday while flies circle lazily above baskets of dates and figs. Merchants argue loudly over grain prices. A woman laughs openly while bargaining for sandals. Nearby, a travelling storyteller gathers children beneath a shaded awning. Ordinary life sounds louder when fear recedes. The Middle Kingdom also expands Egyptian administration more effectively than earlier periods. Bureaucracy grows increasingly sophisticated. Officials monitor agriculture, labour, taxation, military logistics, and trade with impressive precision. It may not sound romantic. Still, functioning bureaucracy keeps people alive surprisingly often. You spend time among scribes working inside government offices at Itchawi, the new royal capital established near the Nile's centre. The rooms smell of ink, lamp smoke and damp papyrus. Clerks move constantly between storage archives, carrying bundles of records tied carefully with linen cords. One exhausted scribe rubs his eyes while recalculating grain distributions for a northern district. His supervisor corrects mistakes without much patience. Outside, labourers wait nervously for official decisions affecting next season's planting rights. Paperwork has always possessed the power to alter lives quietly. The Middle Kingdom rulers also strengthen Egypt's borders more aggressively now. Fortresses rise in Nubia to secure gold supplies and control southern trade routes. Soldiers stationed there endure long isolation beneath brutal desert conditions. You visit one frontier fortress during late summer heat. Stone walls radiate warmth even after sunset. Guards patrol slowly carrying bows and spears while sweat darkens their linen tunics. The Nile here feels narrower and harsher, squeezed between rocky cliffs. A young soldier admits he misses the sound of frogs near his home village farther north. Tiny details become precious during loneliness. Egyptian literature flourishes unexpectedly during these centuries too. Perhaps hardship has deepened emotional reflection. Surviving texts from the Middle Kingdom often feel more personal and psychologically aware than earlier royal inscriptions. Stories explore doubt now, regret, disappointment, human vulnerability. One famous tale follows a man shipwrecked far from home who weeps openly from fear before encountering a mysterious serpent ruler. Another text presents a weary soul debating whether life itself remains worth enduring. Ancient people rarely sound as emotionally distant as modern audiences expect. You sit beside a teacher reciting literature aloud to students beneath an open courtyard shaded with woven reeds. Dust drifts softly through sunlight, while boys repeat difficult passages from memory. One student secretly scratches jokes into the edge of his practice board when the instructor looks away. Some forms of student behaviour are eternal. Religion also evolves during the Middle Kingdom. Ideas about the afterlife become more democratised again. Eternal survival no longer belongs mainly to kings and elites. Ordinary Egyptians increasingly expect spiritual judgment after death. This shift changes moral imagination profoundly. Now behaviour matters beyond social status alone. Texts speak of ethical conduct, kindness, honesty, and fairness in ways that feel more intimate than earlier ceremonial religion. Of course, reality remains imperfect. Corruption still exists. Power still concentrates upward. The poor still struggle hardest during bad years. But there is growing awareness that rulers carry responsibility toward their people. You feel that awareness one evening while watching a local governor oversee grain distribution after minor flood damage strikes nearby villages. He moves carefully through the crowd, speaking with farmers directly instead of remaining distant behind guards. Perhaps he genuinely cares. Perhaps he simply fears unrest. Motives in history are rarely pure. Still, hungry families receive grain that night. As darkness settles across the Nile Valley, temple bells echo softly through warm air while lanterns flicker along riverboats drifting between restored towns. Egypt feels steadier now. Not invulnerable, never invulnerable, but steadier. And somewhere beyond the northern horizon, new strangers are already beginning to study this wealthy, recovering kingdom with ambitious eyes. The house is already warm before sunrise. A servant opens the wooden shutters carefully to invite cooler morning air inside, though the relief will not last long. Beyond the courtyard wall, you hear donkeys braying, sandals scraping across packed earth, and distant voices drifting from the riverbank where boats unload grain into crowded storage yards. The Nile Valley is alive with work again. By the height of the Middle Kingdom, Egypt feels organised, prosperous, and deeply structured. Society moves according to invisible layers that everybody understands instinctively. Kings rule beneath divine authority. Officials manage provinces. Priests maintain sacred order. Scribes preserve administration. Craftsmen build beauty, farmers feed everyone, and beneath it all, countless unnamed labourers carry the kingdom quietly forward. You spend time now not among kings or generals, but inside ordinary rhythms, because civilizations are rarely understood fully from palaces alone. You begin with a scribe named Panesi who lives comfortably but modestly near a provincial administrative centre. Each morning he washes carefully using cool water poured from painted ceramic jars, before dressing in fresh linen that smells faintly of natron soap and cedar oil. He takes pride in cleanliness. Egyptians generally do. The climate demands constant attention to hygiene. Sweat gathers quickly beneath the heat. Shaved heads and short wigs help manage lice. Linen clothing stays light and breathable. Wealthier households burn incense or use scented oils against unpleasant smells drifting through crowded streets. Civilization often depends upon practical discomfort management. Panesi walks to work carrying reed pens tucked neatly into a wooden pallet stained black with years of ink. His office sits beside a grain administration complex, where workers weigh harvest deliveries under official supervision. Inside, the atmosphere feels surprisingly tense for a room full of paperwork. Farmers argue about taxes. Officials dispute measurements. Clerks hurry between tables carrying rolled documents. One exhausted labourer wipes dust from his forehead while insisting his district suffered flood damage severe enough to justify lower grain quotas. The supervising official listens with visible impatience but eventually reduces the demand slightly. Negotiation shapes survival constantly. Scribes occupy a strange position socially. They're respected, educated, and relatively secure, yet also trapped inside endless administrative responsibilities. Panesi spends entire afternoons recording inventories while his wrist cramps from repetitive motion. At one point he mutters softly that stonecutters at least get sunlight. Honestly, every profession imagines another profession is easier. Outside government offices, craftsmen work in crowded workshops heavy with heat and noise. You visit a furniture maker shaping cedarwood imported from the Levant. Fine dust floats through beams of afternoon light, while bronze tools scrape rhythmically against polished surfaces. His apprentices move carefully around him, carrying carved chair legs and inlaid decorative pieces destined for elite households. The craftsmanship feels astonishingly refined. Egyptian artisans understand proportion, balance, and elegance with quiet confidence now. Jewellery gleams with gold and semi-precious stones. Wall paintings capture movement beautifully. Linen weaving becomes extraordinarily delicate. Beauty matters deeply here, not only for vanity, but for spiritual order. A well-made object reflects harmony within the universe itself. Yet skilled labour also carries physical cost. The furniture maker's shoulders ache constantly. One apprentice has a scar across his thumb from a slipped chisel. Another coughs persistently from inhaling wood dust in enclosed workshops. Art leaves marks on the body. You travel farther into farming villages where most Egyptians still live much harder lives. Mud brick houses cluster beside irrigation canals buzzing with insects. Children chase ducks through shallow water, while women grind grain using heavy stone querns worn smooth from generations of use. The sound of grinding never fully stops in these settlements. Stone against grain, again and again, hour after hour. A farmer named Hori invites you to share a midday meal beneath a woven reed canopy beside his field. Bread, onions, dried fish, and weak beer, simple food, but filling enough after long labour beneath the sun. His hands are thick with calluses. His back hurts constantly now that he's past 40. He laughs when speaking about youth, though not bitterly. Your knees become weather prophets, he jokes quietly while stretching sore legs. Dry humour survives every civilization. Hori worries constantly about flood levels despite several stable years. Farmers along the Nile never fully relax. Too little water means famine. Too much means destruction. Anxiety settles permanently into agricultural life. Still, there are moments of beauty. At dusk, fields glow gold beneath lowering sunlight while ibises move through shallow canals searching for insects. Palm trees sway gently beside darkening water. For a few brief minutes, the entire valley seems peaceful enough to last forever. Then mosquitoes arrive. History often smells less romantic than paintings suggest. You spend evenings inside wealthier households too, where elite families dine beside painted walls and lotus-shaped lamps. Musicians play harps softly during meals, while servants refill cups with wine flavoured using herbs and dates. Conversation drifts toward politics, marriages, temple donations, and court gossip. One noblewoman complains discreetly that her cousin married beneath the family's status. Another worries about increasing corruption among provincial tax officials. Nearby, a teenage boy pretends confidence while secretly terrified about upcoming military training. Human insecurity never changes much across centuries. Children in ancient Egypt grow up quickly by modern standards. Many work from young ages assisting family trades or household labour. Yet affection appears everywhere too. Mothers hold sleeping infants against their shoulders while humming softly near cooking fires. Fathers carve toys from scraps of wood. One small girl proudly shows you a rag doll with painted eyes and braided hair made from linen threads. She carries it everywhere. Religion remains woven into ordinary life constantly. Small household shrines hold protective figures of gods and ancestors. People whisper prayers before journeys, business agreements, childbirth or medical treatment. Amulets hang around necks to guard against illness and bad fortune. Not because Egyptians are unusually superstitious, because uncertainty surrounds them daily. Medicine developed surprisingly far during these centuries. Physicians treat wounds, set broken bones, stitch injuries, and prescribe herbal remedies based upon accumulated observation. Some treatments work well. Others involve magical incantations alongside practical care. The line between medicine and spirituality feels very thin here. One doctor examines a labourer suffering from severe back pain after quarry work. He massages oil into damaged muscles while murmuring protective words to nearby deities. The patient seems grateful for both approaches equally. Pain makes people flexible about methodology. As night deepens across the Nile Valley, exhausted silence gradually settles over homes and streets. Oil lamps burn lower. Dogs bark occasionally beyond distant walls. From somewhere across the river comes faint music drifting through warm darkness. You lie awake listening to the sounds of an ancient civilization breathing around you. Not through kings alone, not through monuments alone, but through ordinary people trying carefully to build meaningful lives between birth and death beside the eternal river. The horses arrive before dawn. That is how many Egyptians first remember the strangers from the north, not as kings, not as conquerors, as noise. Wheels rattling over hard ground, hooves striking earth faster than any messenger on foot. Animals taller and stranger than most Nile farmers have ever seen. The sound alone feels unnatural. Egypt has known conflict before. Certainly, rival dynasties, border raids, civil wars between Egyptians themselves, but the Hyksos bring something different into the delta during the Second Intermediate period around the 17th century BCE. New weapons, new tactics, new uncertainty, and perhaps most unsettling of all, they stay. You travel north into the delta where waterways divide endlessly through thick marshland and fertile fields. The air smells damp and heavy here, rich with mud, fish, stagnant pools, and growing grain. Reeds sway constantly in the breeze. Villages appear and disappear between winding channels. It is difficult territory to control fully. That matters. For generations, migrants from Western Asia have entered Egypt gradually through trade, labour, and settlement. Many come peacefully searching for opportunity within Egypt's wealthy cities and agricultural lands. Some serve as merchants, craftsmen, soldiers, or administrators. Civilizations always attract outsiders when prosperous. At first, the cultural blending feels ordinary enough. Foreign names appear beside Egyptian ones in records. Different styles of pottery circulate through markets. New musical instruments and customs spread quietly between communities. But weakening central authority changes everything again. As Middle Kingdom power fractures, foreign rulers eventually established dominance over northern Egypt from the city of Avaris. Egyptian texts later call them Hyksos, often translated roughly as rulers of foreign lands. The phrase carries obvious resentment. You enter Avaris during its height and immediately sense the difference from older Egyptian cities. The streets feel louder somehow, more crowded, more internationally mixed. Levantine architectural influences blend beside Egyptian temples and administrative buildings. Foreign languages mingle openly through the markets. Some Egyptians hate this atmosphere instantly. Others adapt quickly. Trade thrives under Hyksos rule. Ships crowd harbour districts carrying timber, metals, oils, ceramics, and luxury goods. Workshops produce weapons using bronze technology refined through broader Near Eastern connections. Most importantly, horses and chariots reshape military thinking permanently. The first time you stand near a war chariot in motion, the speed feels startling even to you. Horses snort clouds into the cool morning air while wheels throw dust violently across the road. Archers practice firing accurately while moving at terrifying pace. Traditional Egyptian infantry suddenly looks vulnerable. Military innovation often feels unfair to the people encountering it first. Egyptian attitudes toward the Hyksos remain deeply complicated. Later, royal propaganda portrays them as brutal invaders who desecrated temples and oppressed the land mercilessly. Reality appears more nuanced. Some Hyksos rulers adopt Egyptian titles, worship certain Egyptian gods, and govern through familiar administrative systems. They understand legitimacy matters. Still, occupation creates emotional tension regardless of policy. You sit inside a crowded Delta tavern where Egyptian labourers drink beer beside foreign merchants speaking accented Egyptian. The atmosphere feels wary but functional. People trade jokes cautiously. Arguments flare occasionally over politics or taxes before fading again into tired silence. Most ordinary citizens simply want stability. One fisherman shrugs when asked about the foreign rulers. The river floods the same, he says while repairing a torn net. That response feels profoundly human. Empires rise and fall above ordinary people constantly, but daily survival remains stubbornly immediate. Yet resentment grows stronger farther south, where native Egyptian rulers maintain independent kingdoms centered around Thebes. There, the Hyksos presence becomes symbolically unbearable. Not merely political domination, but humiliation. Egypt ruled by outsiders. The idea cuts deeply into national identity. You travel southward into Theban territory where anti-Hyksos sentiment burns openly now. Temple priests speak passionately about restoring proper order beneath native kings. Soldiers train harder. Weapons production increases steadily. The atmosphere smells of preparation. Metalworking fires burn late into the night. Leather armor hangs drying beside barracks walls. Young recruits practice archery until their fingers blister beneath rough bowstrings. One veteran studies captured Hyksos chariot designs carefully beside a workshop. His expression remains thoughtful rather than angry. Egypt, he understands, must learn from its enemies to defeat them. That lesson changes history. The Hyksos unintentionally transform Egypt into a more militarized society. Earlier pharaohs relied heavily upon symbolic authority and regional stability. Now Egyptian rulers begin embracing standing armies. Advanced weaponry, horse warfare, and aggressive military organization. Fear can become an extraordinary teacher. Meanwhile, ordinary life continues awkwardly beneath divided rule. Farmers still harvest grain. Children still splash through irrigation canals during hot afternoons. Weddings still fill houses with music and dancing beneath oil lamps. People continue being people even during occupation. You visit the household of an Egyptian potter married to a woman whose family arrived generations earlier from Canaan. Their children speak multiple languages naturally. At dinner they eat Egyptian bread beside Levantine stews flavoured with unfamiliar spices. Identity blurs inside families long before governments acknowledge it. The potter worries constantly about growing hostility between communities. He feels Egyptian completely, yet neighbours increasingly distrust anyone connected to foreign ancestry. Political fear tends to simplify human complexity into dangerous categories. One evening, heavy rain falls unexpectedly across the delta while you shelter inside a warehouse near the harbour. Water drums against the roof while merchants argue quietly nearby about rising tensions in the south. War feels close now. Very close. The Hyksos rulers themselves seem aware of the danger. Fortifications strengthen around strategic cities. Alliances shift constantly. Diplomatic messages move urgently along trade routes carrying promises, threats, and demands. And in Thebes, a royal family prepares carefully for rebellion. You stand beside the Nile one night watching torchlight flicker across black water while distant thunder rolls beyond the delta marshes. The river continues northward exactly as it always has, unconcerned with nationality or dynasties, but Egypt is changing again. The old inward-looking kingdom of pyramid builders is disappearing. In its place rises something harder, more anxious, more militarized, and far more dangerous to its enemies. The strangers have taught Egypt new ways to fight. Soon the Egyptians will use those lessons well. The chariot wheels are wrapped in leather to soften the sound. Even so, you hear them approaching through the darkness before you fully see them. Horses breathe heavily in the cool pre-dawn air, while soldiers tighten bowstrings with practiced hands. Somewhere nearby, an officer murmurs final instructions beneath his breath. The rebellion has become a war now. In Thebes, the royal family no longer speaks cautiously about coexistence with the Hyksos rulers in the north. The language has hardened into liberation, vengeance, divine duty. Native Egyptian kings present themselves as restorers of proper order against foreign occupation. And after generations of humiliation, many Egyptians are ready to believe them completely. You move through military camps along the Nile where blacksmiths hammer bronze spearheads late into the night. Sparks rise briefly into darkness before vanishing above rows of tents smelling of sweat, leather, smoke, and horse dung. Soldiers sharpen axes beside cooking fires while priests move between units, offering blessings from the gods. War reshapes entire societies long before battles begin. The Theban ruler Seqenenre becomes one of the earliest faces of resistance. Later examinations of his mummy reveal horrifying head wounds likely suffered in combat. The injuries feel brutally personal even thousands of years later. A crushed cheekbone, deep axe cuts, fractured skull. History sometimes becomes uncomfortably physical. You imagine the chaos surrounding his final moments. Dust, shouting, horses screaming nearby, blood-soaking linen. Perhaps he dies instantly, perhaps not. Accounts differ, but his death transforms resistance into sacred obligation for those who survive him. His son Kamosi continues the campaign aggressively. Official inscriptions portray him as furious at Egypt's division. One text describes him complaining bitterly about sharing the land with both Hyksos rulers in the north and Nubian powers in the south. His frustration feels almost claustrophobic. Egyptian kings are accustomed to imagining unified authority. Fragmentation offends them emotionally as much as politically. You travel with a Theban army pushing northward along the Nile. The soldiers move faster and more professionally than earlier Egyptian forces from centuries before. Chariots accompany infantry units. Composite bows strike harder and farther. Military hierarchy feels disciplined now. The Hyksos changed Egypt permanently by forcing adaptation. Ironically, occupation often strengthens the cultures it tries to dominate. One young archer walks beside you carrying extra bowstrings looped carefully over his shoulder. He cannot be older than 18. His face still carries traces of adolescence beneath the dust and tension. He admits quietly that he's never actually killed anyone before. Most soldiers throughout history have not, until suddenly they have. The army camps beside the river each night. Fires glow softly beneath enormous stars while cooks prepare barley porridge and dried fish for exhausted troops. Men clean weapons obsessively before sleep. Some pray. Others joke too loudly from nervousness. One veteran complains constantly about saddle sores with such dramatic misery that nearby soldiers start laughing despite themselves. Dark humour survives especially well inside armies. The campaigns become increasingly brutal as resistance hardens. Towns loyal to the Hyksos face sieges and reprisals. Supply routes burn. Prisoners appear in chains behind marching columns. Official victory inscriptions celebrate destruction with unsettling enthusiasm. Ancient warfare rarely leaves much room for gentleness. Yet amid the violence, moments of ordinary humanity continue appearing unexpectedly. You pass through a recently captured village where Egyptian soldiers share bread with hungry children, despite orders to move quickly. Nearby, an exhausted medic wraps bandages around a wounded enemy fighter without comment. Compassion survives strangely selective during war. Eventually, Ahmose III, a brother or son of Kamosa, depending on scholarly interpretation, emerges as the decisive leader who finally expels the Hyksos from Egypt completely around 1550 BCE. His victory marks more than political reunification. It marks the birth of the new kingdom, and the emotional atmosphere changes immediately. Egypt no longer sees itself as merely defending stability along the Nile. Now it views military strength as essential for survival. The memory of foreign occupation cuts too deeply to ignore. Fear becomes doctrine. You enter Thebes during victory celebrations after major campaigns conclude. Crowds fill the streets, carrying flowers and waving palm branches beneath bright desert sunlight. Temple musicians play drums and long trumpets while priests burn thick clouds of incense that drift above cheering civilians. The noise feels overwhelming after years of military tension. Women lean from balconies, scattering petals onto passing soldiers. Veterans march proudly beneath captured enemy standards. Chariots roll through the city displaying foreign weapons and prisoners as proof of restored Egyptian power. Public triumph always masks private grief somewhere nearby, because nearly every family has lost someone. One older woman watches the celebrations silently from a doorway, clutching a folded piece of linen once belonging to her dead son. She does not join the cheering. She simply watches the soldiers pass with tired eyes. Victory never arrives equally for everyone. Ahmose rewards loyal military families with land and status, helping create a stronger warrior class within Egyptian society. The military now offers social mobility alongside danger. Young men from modest backgrounds suddenly imagine advancement through battlefield service. Empires require ambition from below as much as authority from above. The New Kingdom rulers also begin looking outward aggressively after reunification. The logic feels painfully understandable. If foreign powers once invaded Egypt successfully, then Egypt must project power beyond its borders before threats can gather again. Defense gradually becomes expansion. Expansion gradually becomes empire. You notice the psychological shift in temple art almost immediately. Pharaohs are depicted larger, more muscular, more openly martial than earlier rulers. Scenes show kings trampling enemies beneath chariot wheels while gods personally hand them victory. Masculinity itself becomes militarized. Meanwhile, practical military reforms continue quietly behind ceremonial propaganda. Permanent garrisons expand. Weapon production increases. Horses become prestigious symbols of elite power. Military officers gain influence at court. Egypt is learning how to become an empire. And empires demand constant motion. One evening you stand beside the Nile watching returning soldiers wash blood and dust from their arms beneath fading sunlight. The water turns briefly reddish around them before carrying everything northward into darkness. Nearby, A young recruit stares silently across the river after his first battle. He survived. His friend did not. No speech explains that difference satisfactorily. The air smells of wet leather, river mud, and distant cooking fires drifting from Thebes beyond the shoreline. Somewhere temple bells echo softly through the dusk while priests thank the gods for victory. But beneath the celebration and relief, something harder has settled permanently into Egypt now. A kingdom once defined by stone tombs and river rhythms has become a kingdom that knows how to wage war far from home. And soon it will. Morning sunlight spills across the temples of Karnak like molten gold. Columns painted in deep blues and reds rise above you in endless rows while priests move silently through cool stone halls, carrying incense burners that trail sweet smoke into the air. Outside the temple walls, Thebes pulses with wealth unlike anything Egypt has known before. The empire is expanding now in every direction, and the Nile carries its riches home. The new kingdom begins with military urgency, but success quickly transforms urgency into ambition. Egyptian armies push north into the Levant and south deeper into Nubia, securing trade routes, tribute networks, and strategic territory. Pharaohs no longer wait fearfully for foreign threats. They ride outward to meet them first. You travel with a military convoy returning from campaigns in Syria-Palestine during the reign of Thutmose III, one of Egypt's greatest warrior kings. The roads are crowded with soldiers, scribes, pack animals, and captured goods moving steadily south toward the Nile. Bronze weapons clatter softly against chariot frames. Horses snort beneath decorative harnesses dusted white from long travel. Prisoners walk under guard carrying tribute from defeated cities. Gold, cedar, wine, silver, exotic fabrics, strange animals never before seen in Egypt. Empire smells surprisingly physical up close. Sweat, leather, spices, animal fur, and dust. Thutmose III himself becomes legendary through relentless campaigning. Official inscriptions at Karnak record his victories with extraordinary detail. City after city submits to Egyptian authority. Battle after battle expands the empire farther north than ever before. Yet even legends remain human somewhere beneath the monuments. You watch the king reviewing troops one afternoon beneath brutal heat. He appears disciplined, controlled, almost unreadable in public. But age shows faintly around his eyes now, after years of warfare. His hands bear small scars hidden beneath ceremonial jewellery. Conquest extracts payment eventually from everyone involved. The Egyptian military machine has become astonishingly sophisticated. Chariot divisions move rapidly across difficult terrain. Archers train constantly for precision under pressure. Supply networks stretch across hundreds of miles supported by scribes obsessed with inventory accuracy. No empire survives on courage alone. It survives on logistics. You spend time among the supply administrators responsible for feeding armies far from the Nile Valley. Their work feels endless. Grain calculations, water estimates, livestock counts, wheel repairs, arrow production. One exhausted official mutters that soldiers receive glory while clerks receive headaches. He is probably correct. Meanwhile, Egypt itself grows dazzlingly wealthy from tribute and trade. Temples expand enormously under royal patronage. Noble estates become extravagant. Luxury goods circulate through elite society with increasing abundance. You walk through the palace district at Thebes where foreign ambassadors wait nervously beneath painted ceilings for audiences with Egyptian officials. Their gifts sit displayed carefully nearby. Ivory tusks, leopard skins, fine metalwork, rare oils sealed inside alabaster jars. Egypt now expects deference from neighbouring kingdoms, and often receives it. At royal banquets, musicians perform beside pools filled with floating lotus flowers, while servants circulate carrying roasted duck, figs, wine, honey cakes, and imported delicacies. Perfumed oils glisten on carefully styled wigs. Gold jewellery flashes beneath torchlight. The atmosphere feels confident, almost to the point of arrogance. Empires frequently mistake success for permanence. You notice subtle signs of strain already hidden beneath the prosperity. Campaigns require enormous funding. Frontier garrisons stretch far from home. Tribute systems depend upon constant military pressure to remain stable. Conquest creates obligations alongside wealth. A veteran officer sits beside you one evening after too much wine and admits quietly that occupying distant territories feels like holding sand in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, he says, the faster it slips away. His honesty feels dangerous. Officially, the empire is eternal. Still, ordinary Egyptians benefit materially from imperial expansion in visible ways. Markets overflow with imported goods. Skilled craftsmen find steady work decorating temples and palaces. Nubian gold fuels massive construction projects. Foreign crops and artistic influences enrich daily life. The empire changes Egypt culturally as well as economically. You visit the workshop of a painter decorating a noble tomb near Thebes. The walls show scenes influenced partly by foreign artistic styles, brought through imperial contact. Syrian horses appear beside traditional Egyptian hunting imagery. Imported pigments create new colour variations. The painter himself has never travelled beyond the Nile Valley, yet the empire reaches him anyway. His young apprentice asks endless questions about foreign lands described by soldiers passing through the city. Snow-covered mountains, dense forests, vast seas. The boy listens wide-eyed while grinding mineral pigments into fine powder. Conquest expands imagination even for people who never leave home. Women at elite courts increasingly wear imported jewellery and cosmetics influenced by Levantine fashions. Foreign musicians perform at temples. Diplomatic marriages bring royal women from neighbouring kingdoms into Egyptian palaces, carrying unfamiliar customs and languages. Cultural purity becomes impossible inside empires. Though many Egyptians still pretend otherwise, one evening you stand beside the docks at Thebes where ships unload tribute from Nubia beneath flickering torchlight. Labourers stagger beneath heavy sacks of gold ore while scribes record deliveries obsessively onto papyrus scrolls. Nearby, a Nubian captive stares silently across the river toward the dark desert beyond the city. He cannot understand most conversations around him. His wrists bear rope marks from transport. Empire always feels different depending upon which side of conquest you stand. That truth rarely appears in victory inscriptions. Religion grows more politically powerful during these prosperous centuries too. The god Amun rises to extraordinary prominence through royal sponsorship. His priesthood accumulates immense wealth and influence, especially at Karnak where temple complexes expand continuously. You walk through Karnak during a major festival when crowds fill the processional avenues carrying offerings beneath banners snapping in the hot wind. Drums echo between towering columns, while priests parade sacred statues through incense smoke thick enough to sting your eyes. The spectacle feels overwhelming by design. Religion and state authority blend almost seamlessly now. The pharaoh conquers because the gods favour him. The gods favour him because he conquers. Circular logic can sustain empires for astonishing lengths of time. As night settles across Thebes, the city glows with reflected torchlight from temples. Palaces, workshops, taverns, and riverside homes crowded along the Nile. Music drifts through warm darkness beside the scent of roasting meat and river water. Egypt has become the dominant power of the Eastern Mediterranean world. Rich, feared, confident, restless. And somewhere within all that triumph, beneath the gold and ceremony and military glory, the seeds of future instability are already quietly taking root. The city feels wrong the moment you arrive. Not ruined, not impoverished, wrong. Wide streets stretch beneath harsh sunlight where new temples rise quickly from pale stone, their walls strangely open to the sky. The familiar smell of incense still drifts through the air, but the atmosphere lacks the comforting weight of old Egyptian ritual. Even the shadows seem thinner here. This is Akhetaten, the city of the horizon of Aten, And one man's religious revolution has unsettled an entire civilization. His birth name is Amenhotep IV, son of the powerful pharaoh Amenhotep III, under whom Egypt reached extraordinary wealth and prestige. The empire flourished. Foreign rulers sent tribute eagerly. The temples of Amun grew unimaginably rich, perhaps too rich. When Amenhotep IV takes the throne around 1353 BCE, few expect him to transform Egypt so radically. At first he behaves conventionally enough. Ceremonies continue. Temples function normally. Court life flows with familiar rhythms. Then gradually something shifts. The young king becomes increasingly devoted to Aten, a solar deity represented not as human or animal, but as the physical disk of the sun itself. Aten is not entirely new within Egyptian religion, but Amenhotep elevates the god with startling intensity. Eventually he changes his own name to Akhenaten, effective for Aten. The decision carries enormous consequences. You stand inside one of the old temples at Karnak while priests whisper anxiously beside extinguished offering fires. Donations have slowed. Royal attention is drifting elsewhere. Rumours spread constantly now through palace corridors and crowded markets alike. The king is closing temples. The king no longer honours Amun properly. The king says Aten alone deserves worship. No one fully understands what is happening yet. Akhenaten eventually abandons the traditional royal centres altogether and builds an entirely new capital deep in Middle Egypt. Akhenaten rises quickly from the desert with almost obsessive urgency. Workers swarm across construction sites beneath blistering heat, while officials mark out grand avenues and open-air sanctuaries aligned carefully beneath the sun. The city itself reflects the new theology. Older Egyptian temples often feel mysterious and enclosed, their sacred chambers dark and hidden. Akhenaten's temples stand exposed beneath sunlight. Aten must shine directly upon offerings. The god's rays are depicted ending in tiny human hands extending life toward the royal family. It all feels strangely intimate and strangely impersonal at the same time. You walk through palace courtyards painted with lively natural scenes, unlike earlier rigid royal art. Birds flutter through marsh reeds. Flowers bloom across walls. The king himself appears in surprisingly vulnerable ways. His body is depicted with elongated features, soft stomach, narrow limbs, heavy hips. Historians still debate why. Some suspect symbolic religious imagery. Others suggest artistic experimentation. No clear agreement survives. But the effect remains startling after centuries of idealized pharaonic perfection. Akhenaten appears human in ways Egyptian kings rarely allow themselves to appear, and perhaps that humanity unsettles people as much as the theology. The royal family occupies the emotional center of Aten worship. Akhenaten, his queen Nefertiti, and their daughters appear constantly beneath the sun disk receiving divine rays directly. Ordinary Egyptians access Aten largely through devotion to the royal household itself. Religion becomes intensely centralized around one family. You attend a public ceremony where Akhenaten and Nefertiti stand together beneath blazing midday light, while priests present offerings of bread, flowers, wine, and incense. The heat feels relentless. Sweat runs beneath ceremonial linen while musicians continue playing despite obvious exhaustion. Akhenaten barely seems to notice discomfort. His attention remains fixed upward toward the sun. Nearby officials exchange careful glances. Some appear sincerely devoted. Others look nervous. Public enthusiasm inside authoritarian systems is always difficult to measure honestly, especially during revolutions. And this is absolutely a revolution. The old priesthoods lose influence rapidly. Temples dedicated to traditional gods close or fall into neglect. The names of Amun and certain deities are even chiseled from monuments in acts bordering on religious erasure. Egyptians have worshipped many gods for thousands of years. Now suddenly one ruler demands near exclusivity. That kind of change rarely settles peacefully inside human hearts. You spend time among ordinary citizens in Akhetaten trying to understand how they truly feel. Most sound confused more than passionate. A baker shrugs while kneading dough beside a clay oven. The sun still rises, he says carefully. People still need bread. Practical survival often outranks theological debate. Still, uncertainty spreads quietly through families. Older generations miss familiar rituals. Household shrines become awkward subjects. Priests displaced from former temples struggle financially and emotionally. One former servant of Amun sits beside the Nile at dusk, staring silently into dark water. He spent 40 years memorizing sacred hymns now considered politically dangerous. Imagine waking one morning to discover your entire spiritual life has become obsolete. The emotional violence of that shift feels enormous. Meanwhile, foreign affairs begin deteriorating around Egypt's empire. Letters from allied rulers arrive begging for military support against regional threats. Some historians argue Akhenaten neglects international politics, while focusing obsessively upon religious transformation. The evidence remains debated, but tension clearly grows beyond Egypt's borders during his reign, inside Akhetaten itself. However, moments of genuine beauty exist alongside instability. The artistic style becomes remarkably tender at times. Royal daughters climb affectionately onto their parents' laps during official scenes. Nefertiti appears powerful, elegant, almost equal beside the king. Sunlight floods everything. The city smells of fresh plaster, desert dust, lotus perfume, and heated stone. Chariots roll along broad roads lined with newly planted trees struggling against the dry climate. At night, musicians perform softly within palace gardens, while oil lamps flicker against painted walls. You almost understand the appeal. Akhenaten seems to believe he's purifying reality itself, stripping away old complexity, revealing direct divine truth beneath centuries of ritual accumulation. Many revolutionaries throughout history share similar confidence. Few leave stable worlds behind them. As the years pass, strain deepens. Certain royal daughters die young. Foreign pressure mounts. Court factions whisper constantly behind polished doors. Akhenaten himself grows increasingly isolated inside his vision. And beyond the bright walls of Akhetaten, old Egypt waits patiently in the shadows. The old gods are quieter now, but not gone. The boy king walks carefully through rooms built for older men. Servants lower their eyes as he passes beneath painted ceilings, while officials trail close behind, offering advice he never requested. Outside the palace walls, Thebes breathes cautiously again after years of religious upheaval. Dust moves softly through temple courtyards abandoned during Akhenaten's revolution. Workers scrape old plaster from walls where forbidden symbols once gleamed beneath sunlight. Egypt is trying to remember itself, and at the center of that effort stands a child. Tutankhamun becomes pharaoh around 1332 BCE, likely no older than 9. His early life remains blurred by uncertainty and political tension. He's probably born Tutankhaten, carrying devotion to Aten directly within his name. But names are changing quickly now. So is history. Akhenaten is dead, or close to it. The revolutionary city at Akhetaten already feels strangely temporary despite its grand ambitions. Court officials begin abandoning it almost immediately. Furniture disappears first, then priests, then administrators. Sand drifts gradually across unfinished roads beneath the relentless desert wind. Revolutions often decay faster than they rise. You travel through Akhetaten during its decline. The silence feels haunting. Courtyards once crowded with ceremony now echo, only with footsteps and distant bird calls. Painted walls fade beneath heat and neglect. A child's toy lies abandoned beside a doorway partly buried in sand. Someone expected to return for it. Perhaps they never could. Back in Thebes, powerful court figures move carefully around the young king. 2 men especially dominate the political landscape, an elderly advisor with deep court experience, and Horemheb, a respected military commander. Both understand Egypt needs stability urgently. The restoration begins quietly at first. Temples reopen, traditional priests return, old rituals resume. Most significantly, the young king changes his name from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. One small shift in language announces an entire civilization turning backward toward familiar gods. You stand inside Karnak as priests relight temple fires extinguished during Akhenaten's reign. Incense thickens the air again while hymns once suppressed echo through towering halls. Some worshippers weep openly during ceremonies restored after years of uncertainty. Faith carries emotional memory powerfully. An old woman touches a temple wall gently as though greeting a lost friend returned from exile. The restoration is not purely spiritual, of course. Politics and religion remain inseparable in Egypt. Rebuilding the authority of Amun's priesthood also rebuilds traditional state structures weakened during Akhenaten's experiment. Order matters more now than innovation. The young Tutankhamun himself remains difficult to know clearly. His surviving statues and treasures later create an image of dazzling royal beauty. But the real boy behind the gold appears fragile. Modern examinations suggest physical ailments, clubfoot, bone disorders, chronic pain. Accounts differ regarding severity. Still, you sense vulnerability around him constantly. He leans slightly during long ceremonies, walks carefully across uneven floors, relies upon carved staffs and attendants more often than official imagery admits. Yet there are moments when his youth appears almost disarmingly ordinary. You watch him laugh unexpectedly during a hunting lesson after a nervous servant falls backward into shallow water beside the marshes. The laughter startles everyone nearby into awkward smiles. For a brief moment, he seems less like a pharaoh than a tired teenager surrounded by impossible expectations. His queen, Ankhesenamun, shares equally complicated history. She's likely Akhenaten's daughter, raised within the religious revolution now being dismantled around her. Imagine the emotional confusion. Your father declared the old gods false. Your husband restores them publicly. Your survival depends upon adapting gracefully. History rarely asks permission before rearranging loyalties. The royal court grows tense beneath polished surfaces. Official inscriptions celebrate restored harmony, but uncertainty lingers everywhere. Foreign territories once loyal to Egypt sense weakness after years of internal disruption. Diplomats arrive carrying troubling reports from Syria and beyond. Military officers whisper about lost influence abroad. Horemheb especially appears restless. He moves through the palace with disciplined confidence while younger officials watch him carefully. Soldiers respect him deeply. Priests trust him more than they trust lingering supporters of Akhenaten's reforms. In another life, perhaps he would already be king. Meanwhile, artisans work tirelessly preparing monuments celebrating Egypt's religious restoration. Workshops smell of paint, sawdust, hot metal and sweat. Sculptors reshape statues abandoned during the Aten period. Stonecutters erase politically dangerous names from monuments. Memory itself becomes curated. One exhausted artisan jokes softly that gods seem to change faster than wall carvings nowadays. Nearby workers laugh nervously before falling quiet again. Certain jokes carry risk inside royal systems. And despite the restoration, traces of Akhenaten's revolution remain impossible to remove completely. Artistic styles stay softer and more naturalistic than earlier rigid conventions. Royal family scenes preserve unusual tenderness. Some theological ideas linger quietly beneath official orthodoxy. History leaves residue behind. You accompany Tutankhamun during a ceremonial appearance at Luxor Temple one evening. Torches flicker against towering columns, while musicians play low rhythmic melodies beneath the warm night air. Crowds gather respectfully along the processional route, hoping for reassurance more than spectacle. The king rides past wearing gold and linen beneath heavy ceremonial jewellery clearly uncomfortable against his slight frame. "People cheer anyway?" Not because he inspires overwhelming confidence, because they desperately want stability to return. That distinction matters. One evening inside the royal residence, you overhear servants discussing rumours in hushed voices. The king has been ill again. Court physicians move constantly through private chambers carrying herbs, oils, bandages, and protective amulets. No one says the word death aloud, but everyone thinks it. Tutankhamun dies unexpectedly around age 19. The exact cause remains uncertain even now. Injury, illness, infection, genetic complications. Historians continue debating possibilities. His death leaves Egypt stunned but strangely prepared. Too many people have already been manoeuvring for succession behind the scenes. The funeral itself feels heartbreakingly intimate beneath its grandeur. Priests chant beside golden shrines, while incense smoke curls thickly through the burial chamber. The boy king's body rests surrounded by astonishing treasures meant to sustain him eternally. Chariots, jewellery, games, weapons, perfumes, walking staffs worn smooth from actual use. That last detail always feels especially human. Not ceremonial staffs untouched by life, real ones. Objects handled by tired hands belonging to a young man who never truly had enough time to become whatever history demanded of him. The statues arrive before the man does. Colossal stone figures rise from the desert cliffs at Abu Simbel, their faces calm and impossibly large beneath the Nubian sun. Workers swarm around unfinished carvings like ants beside mountains, while dust hangs thick in the air. Chisels strike sandstone in endless rhythm from dawn until darkness swallows the valley. Everywhere you travel now, one name follows you. Ramesses. Ramesses the Great. Though naturally he does not call himself that yet. During the 19th dynasty, Egypt reaches another peak of imperial confidence under Ramesses II, who rules for more than 60 years beginning around 1279 BCE. Longevity alone transforms him into something mythic. Entire generations know no other king. Children are born, become adults, grow old, and die beneath his rule. That kind of continuity feels almost supernatural in the ancient world. You first encounter him during a military review near Ramesses in the eastern delta. The grand capital city expands into a sprawling royal centre, crowded with chariot stables, palaces, workshops, and temples. Horses stamp impatiently beneath decorated harnesses while soldiers stand rigid in polished armour despite brutal afternoon heat. Ramesses moves through the ranks with practiced theatrical confidence, because by now kingship itself has become performance as much as governance. He is physically impressive even in middle age. Broad-shouldered, energetic, highly aware of his own image, he speaks constantly about legacy, monuments, victory, divine favour, and honestly, he understands propaganda extraordinarily well. No pharaoh leaves his name carved across Egypt more aggressively than Ramesses II. Temples, statues, obelisks, reliefs. Sometimes he even places his cartouches upon older monuments built by previous kings. Immortality through architecture becomes almost an obsession. You visit construction sites throughout Egypt where labourers haul stone beneath scorching skies, while overseers shout instructions over grinding sledges and hammer blows. The scale feels exhausting just to witness. One worker mutters quietly that the king seems determined to carve his face onto every available surface before death catches him. Nearby labourers laugh carefully. Dry humour remains one of humanity's safest survival tools. Yet Ramesses is not merely vain. He's deeply capable too. Administrative systems remain strong under his rule. Trade flourishes. Temples receive lavish patronage. Diplomacy expands alongside military campaigns. Still, war defines much of his early reign emotionally, especially the famous confrontation with the Hittite Empire at the Battle of Kadesh. You travel north with the Egyptian army during preparations for that campaign around 1274 BCE. The atmosphere hums with restless energy. Chariot wheels creak constantly. Supply officers count grain obsessively. Priests bless weapons beneath drifting incense smoke. The soldiers believe they're marching toward glorious victory. Most armies do. Kadesh itself becomes one of history's largest chariot battles. Confusion spreads quickly across the battlefield after Ramesses receives faulty intelligence about enemy positions. Egyptian divisions become separated. Hittite forces strike suddenly and violently. Dust blinds everyone. Horses scream. Men drown in the Orontes River. Arrows fall through thick clouds of sand and smoke. For several terrifying hours, disaster feels possible. Later, royal inscriptions portray Ramesses as nearly single-handedly saving the army through unmatched courage. The king charges heroically into battle while abandoned by cowardly troops. The gods themselves support him personally. Reality appears far more complicated. Accounts differ sharply between Egyptian and Hittite perspectives. Modern historians generally view Kadesh as closer to a strategic draw than overwhelming Egyptian triumph. But Ramesses controls the monuments, and monuments remember what rulers prefer. You stand afterward among wounded soldiers receiving treatment beside the riverbank. Blood darkens linen bandages while exhausted physicians stitch injuries using bronze needles and honey mixtures against infection. One charioteer stares silently into space after losing both brothers during the fighting. Victory narratives rarely mention people like him, yet they exist behind every inscription. Eventually, Egypt and the Hittites negotiate one of the world's earliest surviving peace treaties. The agreement reflects practical exhaustion on both sides more than romantic diplomacy. Endless warfare costs too much. Empires sometimes choose peace only after discovering how expensive victory truly is. Back in Egypt, Ramesses turns increasingly towards monumental building projects and dynastic display. His family alone feels enormous. Dozens of sons, numerous wives, endless court ceremonies crowded with royal children dressed in linen and gold. Queen Nefertari especially occupies a cherished place beside him. Her tomb later becomes one of the most beautiful in Egypt, painted with remarkable tenderness and colour. Ramesses clearly loves her, at least as much as powerful kings usually permit themselves publicly. You walk through palace gardens one evening while musicians play softly near reflecting pools scented with lotus flowers. Ramesses and Nefertari speak quietly together beneath torchlight, while attendants remain respectfully distant. For a moment they seem almost ordinary, a husband complaining about diplomatic frustrations, a wife teasing him gently for working too late again. History becomes easier to feel emotionally when people stop posing, yet age changes the atmosphere gradually around Ramesses' reign. The empire remains impressive outwardly, but strain accumulates beneath the surface. Building projects consume enormous resources. Foreign pressures increase. Climate instability affects parts of the eastern Mediterranean world. And Ramesses himself keeps aging. That fact alone feels strange after so many decades. Young officials who once feared him become old men themselves. Sons raised expecting eventual succession die before their father does. Court politics grow increasingly tense beneath formal stability. Longevity creates its own complications. One evening you sit beside an aging veteran outside a tavern near Thebes, while warm desert wind carries distant temple music through the darkness. The old soldier fought at Kadesh in his youth. Now his knees ache constantly during cold mornings. He laughs softly, remembering royal inscriptions describing perfect victory. "We survived," he says. "That was victory enough." Perhaps that is the truest description of war ever spoken. As Ramesses enters old age, Egypt still appears magnificent to outsiders. Temples tower above the Nile. Gold fills treasury vaults. Foreign ambassadors bow deeply before the throne. But enormous systems often look strongest shortly before exhaustion begins revealing itself. The king who wanted eternity has nearly achieved it through stone and memory. Still, even Ramesses cannot negotiate permanently with time. The valley is silent except for chisels. High cliffs rise above you in pale gold layers while narrow tomb entrances disappear into shadow beneath the desert rock. The air feels dry enough to crack the skin. Somewhere farther along the path, workers hammer carefully against stone walls deep underground where future kings will sleep among painted stars. This is the Valley of the Kings, and death here has become an industry. By the late New Kingdom, Egypt no longer builds pyramids for its rulers. The old monuments remain impressive, certainly, but they prove too visible, too vulnerable to robbery. Royal tombs now hide within isolated desert valleys west of Thebes, cut deep into the cliffs and sealed behind secrecy, curses, and armed protection, at least in theory. You arrive at the workers' village of Deir el-Medina, where the craftsmen responsible for these royal tombs live with their families. The settlement feels surprisingly intimate. Mud brick houses cluster along narrow lanes filled with children, chickens, cooking smoke, and endless dust carried by desert wind. The men here are elite artisans, painters, stonecutters, sculptors, plasterers. They understand sacred imagery with astonishing precision. Their hands create eternity for kings, yet their own lives remain ordinary in deeply recognizable ways. A worker complains about ration shortages while repairing sandals outside his doorway. Nearby, his wife scolds the son for losing a water jar during play near the cliffs. Someone farther down the lane plays a flute badly enough to inspire loud protests from neighbours. Civilization always contains both transcendence and irritating noise. Each morning before sunrise, work crews leave the village carrying tools, food, and water into the desert. The journey feels solemn. Sand crunches beneath sandals while cool dawn air slowly warms around them. Some workers murmur prayers quietly before entering tomb corridors. The dead deserve caution. Inside the tombs, the atmosphere changes completely. Oil lamps flicker against walls painted with gods, stars, boats, serpents, and sacred texts guiding pharaohs through the afterlife. The smell of fresh plaster mixes with smoke and human sweat trapped in narrow chambers. The work is exhausting and meticulous. One painter lies awkwardly on scaffolding for hours, detailing tiny hieroglyphs along a ceiling, while sweat drips constantly into his eyes. Another grinds mineral pigments into bright powders using stone bowls worn smooth through years of repetition. Blue from azurite, red from ochre, black from carbon soot. Even eternity depends upon chemistry. You spend time with a tomb artisan named Nakhtemun, whose hands tremble slightly now from age and years of precision labour. He worries constantly about mistakes. One incorrect hieroglyph in a funerary text could theoretically endanger a king's soul forever. That is a difficult pressure to carry before breakfast. Yet the workers also possess unusual literacy and cultural sophistication compared to many Egyptians. They write letters, compose poetry, record grievances, and gossip enthusiastically about politics and scandals. Archaeologists later discover their personal writings preserved astonishingly well. Reading them feels almost intimate. One man complains bitterly about lazy co-workers. Another writes tenderly to his wife. Someone records a stolen tunic dispute with exhausting detail. Human beings document petty frustrations across every century equally. The royal tombs themselves grow increasingly elaborate under rulers like Seti I and Ramesses II. Corridors descend deeper underground. Painted scenes become more intricate. Magical texts expand across walls in dense symbolic layers meant to protect the dead king during his cosmic journey. The Egyptians imagine the afterlife as dangerous terrain requiring preparation and knowledge. Death is not passive here, it is travel. You walk through one newly completed royal burial chamber lit only by oil lamps carried carefully through the darkness. Gold gleams faintly from ceremonial objects awaiting the king's eventual arrival. Stars painted across the ceiling seem almost alive in the flickering light. For a moment, the chamber feels suspended outside ordinary time. Then someone coughs loudly from plaster dust and the illusion breaks slightly. That feels appropriate somehow. Meanwhile, outside the tomb valleys, Egypt itself begins showing unmistakable strain during the later New Kingdom. Economic pressure grows, foreign threats intensify, Corruption spreads through administrative systems once admired for efficiency, and the tomb workers notice everything. Because workers always notice when supplies arrive late. At Deir el-Medina, grain rations begin failing intermittently during the reign of Ramesses III. The delays sound minor at first, a few days, then longer. Families grow anxious. Food stores shrink. Eventually something extraordinary happens. The workers strike. Historians consider it one of the earliest recorded labour strikes in human history. You stand beside the gathered artisans while they refuse to continue royal tomb construction until proper rations are restored. Their protest feels calm but firm. They march to nearby temples demanding justice. Explaining simply that hungry men cannot work, the statement feels timeless. Officials panic quietly. Royal tomb construction is sacred labour. Delays threaten both political authority and spiritual continuity. Negotiations begin immediately. One exhausted worker speaks openly about feeding his children. Another points out bitterly that kings expect eternal luxury while living labourers struggle for bread. It is difficult to argue with him honestly. Eventually the workers receive grain and return reluctantly to their duties. But something important has shifted psychologically. The immense confidence of earlier centuries is fading. Faith in the system weakens when even elite royal craftsmen face hunger. You notice growing fear around tomb security too. Grave robbery becomes increasingly common as economic conditions worsen. Tombs filled with gold tempt desperate people and corrupt officials alike. Sometimes the robbers are former workers themselves. Who better understands hidden entrances and burial layouts? One night you accompany patrol guards moving quietly through the Valley of the Kings beneath cold moonlight. The cliffs glow pale silver above the dark tomb entrances. Every sound feels amplified in the stillness. The guards speak softly about recent robberies, missing jewellery, broken seals, disturbed sarcophagi. Even pharaohs cannot fully protect their bodies from the living. Later investigations into tomb robberies reveal painful realities. Some thieves act from desperation, others from greed. Priests, officials, labourers, guards. Corruption spreads through every layer eventually. Civilizations decline unevenly. The temples still stand, the rituals continue, the Nile still floods. But trust begins eroding quietly beneath everything. One evening you sit outside Deir el-Medina while workers return home exhausted beneath a sky crowded with stars. Their children run to greet them carrying oil lamps through drifting dust. Somewhere nearby, a woman laughs warmly at some private joke while bread bakes inside clay ovens. Life continues stubbornly despite uncertainty, and deep beneath the cliffs nearby, kings sleep surrounded by treasures, prayers, and painted promises against oblivion while the civilization protecting them slowly begins to fray at the edges. The city burns before sunrise. Smoke rolls upward into the pale morning sky while temple bells ring frantically through streets crowded with fleeing civilians. Horses scream somewhere beyond the walls. Bronze weapons strike shields with sharp metallic echoes that carry across the Nile like broken music. Egypt has faced invaders before, but now the ancient kingdom is old, tired and increasingly vulnerable. By the first millennium BCE, the new kingdom has collapsed beneath internal division, economic strain, foreign pressure, and weakening royal authority. Dynasties rise and fall quickly. Priests, generals, and regional rulers compete constantly for control. Libya-born kings established dynasties in the delta. Nubian pharaohs later sweep northward from Kush, claiming rightful authority over the Nile Valley. The old certainty is gone. Egypt still possesses beauty, still possesses memory, still possesses immense symbolic power, but no longer unquestioned dominance. You travel through Thebes during one of these transitional centuries and immediately feel the difference from earlier imperial glory. The great temples remain astonishing, certainly. Karnak still towers above the riverbanks beneath blazing sunlight. Luxor still glows beautifully at dusk. Yet maintenance falters in places. Paint peels from neglected walls. Certain courtyards stand partially abandoned. Priests complain quietly about reduced offerings and political instability. The atmosphere feels anxious beneath ceremonial calm. Empires age visibly if you look closely enough. One elderly temple singer pauses during rehearsal because dust from a cracked ceiling keeps falling into her throat. Workers promise repairs soon. Everyone knows resources are limited. Meanwhile, beyond Egypt's borders, powerful new empires expand aggressively across the Near East. Assyria rises first with terrifying military efficiency. Their armies move with ruthless discipline supported by siege technology, iron weapons, and imperial ambition unlike anything Egypt has faced before. The Assyrians do not merely defeat enemies, they intimidate entire regions psychologically. You hear stories about them long before encountering their forces directly. Cities destroyed completely. Populations deported. Rebel leaders publicly executed. Whether exaggerated or not, the fear spreads effectively. Fear itself becomes strategy. Egyptian rulers attempt diplomacy, alliances, military resistance, bribery. Nothing works consistently for long. Internal divisions weaken every response. Rival claimants to the throne undermine one another while foreign armies advance steadily closer. You stand beside Egyptian soldiers near the Delta frontier one tense evening, while cold wind moves through papyrus marshes beneath gathering clouds. The men check equipment repeatedly despite obvious exhaustion. Some carry older bronze weapons beside newer imported iron blades. Technology shifts unevenly during declining eras. One officer studies maps by torchlight while muttering about impossible supply shortages. Another worries openly about loyalty among local governors. Nobody sounds confident anymore. That may be the greatest sign of decline, not defeat itself. The loss of belief before defeat arrives. Eventually, Assyrian kings invade Egypt directly during the 7th century BCE. Battles rage across the Delta and Nile Valley. Cities change hands repeatedly. Thebes itself suffers brutal sackings. Ancient treasures disappear into foreign capitals as trophies. You walk through portions of Thebes after one devastating assault. Statues lie shattered across temple courtyards blackened by fire. The smell of smoke lingers heavily above ruined storehouses. Civilians search silently through debris for missing relatives and salvageable belongings. A child sits beside a broken statue head larger than his entire body. He looks mostly confused. History often feels incomprehensible while living through it. Yet even amid destruction, Egypt refuses complete disappearance. Native dynasties re-emerge periodically. Local traditions endure stubbornly. Temples continue rituals beneath damaged roofs. Farmers still plant beside the Nile because survival leaves little time for surrender. Then new conquerors arrive again. The Persians, under Cambyses II in 525 BCE, the Achaemenid Persian Empire defeats Egypt decisively. Persian rule feels different from Assyrian terror, more administrative, more systematic. Egypt becomes a province within a vast multicultural empire stretching across enormous distances. Many Egyptians resent foreign rule deeply, others adapt pragmatically. Adaptation has always been one of humanity's most underestimated skills. You visit Memphis during Persian administration, where Egyptian scribes now work beside imperial officials speaking Aramaic and Old Persian. Taxes flow outward toward distant capitals. Royal imagery changes subtly. Foreign soldiers patrol streets beside local police. The atmosphere feels strangely layered. Old Egypt still exists visibly everywhere, yet no longer controls itself fully. One Egyptian priest complains quietly that foreign rulers respect Egyptian gods only when politically convenient. Nearby, a merchant shrugs and points out that traders improved under imperial stability. Both perspectives contain truth. That complexity matters. Human beings living under occupation rarely divide neatly into patriots and collaborators. Most simply, navigate survival, loyalty, family obligations, economic pressure, fear, and hope simultaneously. A farmer still worries more about flood levels than imperial ideology most mornings. Still, resentment occasionally erupts into rebellion. Egyptian revolts against Persian rule flare repeatedly across the centuries. Some succeed briefly, most fail. The pattern becomes painfully familiar. Then, from the north again, another conqueror approaches whose name will echo through history louder than nearly anyone before him. Alexander. You first hear rumours long before he reaches Egypt. A Macedonian king defeating Persia repeatedly despite impossible odds. Cities surrendering almost without resistance. Armies moving with astonishing speed. People always speak differently about leaders who seem touched by destiny. When Alexander enters Egypt in 332 BCE, many Egyptians welcome him less because they love Macedonians and more because they despise Persian rule. He presents himself carefully as liberator, not destroyer. Symbolism matters enormously here. He visits temples, honours Egyptian traditions, allows priests respect and authority. At Memphis, ceremonies formally recognize him as pharaoh beneath ancient rituals stretching back thousands of years. The image feels surreal somehow. A young foreign conqueror standing where native kings once stood, while priests chant sacred words older than entire civilizations elsewhere. History bends strangely sometimes. You accompany a procession through Egyptian streets crowded with curious civilians, watching Alexander pass beneath banners and incense smoke. He appears energetic, restless, intensely alive. His confidence radiates almost physically. Nearby, an old Egyptian man watches silently before murmuring, "Another king." The simplicity of the statement feels profound, because Egypt has seen so many rulers now. Native kings, foreign conquerors, restorers, invaders, liberators, occupiers. And through all of them, the Nile continues flowing north beneath the same stars that watched the first villages rise from black mud thousands of years earlier. Empires change. The river remains. The palace smells faintly of sea salt and jasmine. Open windows face the harbour at Alexandria, where ships from across the Mediterranean crowd the water beneath brilliant afternoon light. Sailors shout in Greek, Egyptian, Latin, Hebrew, and languages you cannot immediately recognize, somewhere beyond the palace walls. Scholars debate philosophy inside the great library while merchants bargain over papyrus, glassware, wine, spices, and grain. Egypt has become a crossroads now, and Cleopatra understands that survival depends upon mastering every world surrounding her. By the 1st century BCE, the descendants of Alexander's general Ptolemy rule Egypt as a Greek-speaking dynasty layered uneasily atop ancient Egyptian traditions. The Ptolemies adopt pharaonic imagery publicly while maintaining Macedonian court culture privately. Alexandria becomes one of the richest and most cosmopolitan cities on earth, but the kingdom itself grows politically fragile. Rome is rising, and Rome rarely tolerates wealthy independent neighbours forever. Cleopatra VII inherits this dangerous world in 51 BCE after the death of her father. Ptolemy thwocteened, she's young, intelligent, multilingual, and immediately trapped inside brutal dynastic politics. Officially she must co-rule with her younger brother and husband, Ptolemy XIII. According to family custom, the arrangement collapses almost instantly. Court factions maneuver constantly around the siblings. Advisors whisper through candlelit corridors late into the night. Soldiers change loyalties depending upon rumours spreading through Alexandria's crowded streets. The atmosphere feels electric with tension. You first see Cleopatra during a diplomatic audience beneath painted ceilings, supported by marble columns imported from abroad. She does not resemble later romantic myths entirely. The surviving evidence suggests charisma more than impossible beauty, but charisma can reshape history just as effectively. She speaks with astonishing confidence, moving fluidly between languages depending upon her audience. Greek with court officials, Egyptian with priests, possibly several others besides. That detail matters enormously. Most Ptolemaic rulers never bothered learning Egyptian at all. Cleopatra understands symbolism instinctively, outside the palace. Alexandria pulses with restless energy. The city feels unlike older Egyptian centres along the Nile. Wider streets, massive stone buildings, intellectual culture blending with commercial ambition. Sea wind carries the smell of fish markets. Olive oil, sweat, incense, and library papyrus warmed beneath the sun. You walk through crowded districts where philosophers argue beside taverns full of exhausted sailors. Egyptian temple rituals continue beside Greek theatres and Roman merchants' houses. Identity itself feels fluid here. One bookseller complains bitterly that politics disrupt trade more than philosophy ever does. Nearby, a young student recites Homer dramatically to friends who clearly wish he would stop. Certain personalities survive every century intact. Meanwhile, Rome edges steadily closer into Egyptian affairs. Roman politicians understand Egypt's importance immediately. Its grain feeds enormous populations. Its wealth attracts endless attention. Its strategic location matters enormously within Mediterranean politics. And Rome itself is descending towards civil war. Julius Caesar arrives in Alexandria pursuing his rival Pompey, who's already been murdered by Egyptian courtiers hoping to impress Rome. Instead, the killing disgusts Caesar. He enters a city already simmering with dynastic conflict. Cleopatra sees opportunity instantly. The famous story survives because it feels almost theatrical enough to belong in fiction. Cleopatra arranges secret entry into Caesar's quarters, supposedly concealed within bedding or a carpet depending upon the source. Historians debate details, naturally. Still, the image endures, a young queen risking everything on personal audacity. You imagine the moment vividly. Torchlight flickering against palace walls, nervous servants carrying hidden cargo through guarded corridors, Cleopatra emerging calmly before the most powerful Roman alive, while the future of her kingdom hangs uncertainly in the balance. It works, whether through political intelligence, personal connection, strategic necessity, or all three together. Cleopatra and Caesar become allies and lovers. Civil war erupts in Alexandria between Caesar's forces and supporters of Ptolemy XIII. The fighting turns chaotic quickly. Fire spreads through parts of the harbour district. Civilians flee crowded streets. Smoke drifts across the city while ships burn near the docks. Some ancient sources later claim portions of the Great Library suffered damage during these events. Accounts differ. The truth remains frustratingly uncertain. History often leaves emotional clarity where factual precision disappears. Eventually Caesar prevails. Cleopatra secures the throne. Her brother dies fleeing through the Nile during the conflict, reportedly drowning beneath the weight of ceremonial armour. Power transitions rarely remain graceful within royal families. For a time, Egypt stabilizes beneath Cleopatra's rule. She proves highly capable administratively. Grain shipments resume efficiently. Economic reforms strengthen parts of the kingdom. She travels along the Nile, presenting herself increasingly as both Greek monarch and Egyptian pharaoh. At Dendera Temple, reliefs depict her beside traditional gods in full pharaonic style. She understands performance because survival requires it. Yet Egypt's fate now intertwines completely with Roman politics beyond her control. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, chaos erupts again across the Roman world. Cleopatra aligns herself eventually with Mark Antony, Caesar's ally and one of Rome's most powerful men. Their relationship becomes legendary partly because it combines genuine emotion with enormous political consequence. You accompany royal processions along the Nile where Antony and Cleopatra appear together, beneath gold-covered barges drifting through torch-lit water at night. Music echoes softly across the river while crowds gather along the banks to watch. The spectacle feels intoxicating by design. Antony seems transformed around her. less disciplined, more theatrical. Roman critics later weaponized this image mercilessly, portraying Cleopatra as dangerous seductress corrupting noble Roman masculinity. The propaganda works astonishingly well, because powerful women often become easier to demonize than complicated political realities. Meanwhile, Octavian, the future Augustus, prepares carefully in Rome, calm, strategic, patient. He frames the coming conflict not as Roman civil war, but as defense against foreign Eastern corruption embodied by Cleopatra herself. Narratives decide wars before battles sometimes. The final confrontation arrives at Actium in 31 BCE. Naval warfare explodes across rough waters while smoke and confusion swallow entire fleets. Antony and Cleopatra eventually retreat toward Egypt after catastrophic defeat. Everything afterward feels haunted. Back in Alexandria, tension thickens the palace air. Servants whisper constantly. Loyalists disappear quietly. Roman armies advance steadily closer. One evening, Cleopatra stands alone overlooking the harbour where dark water reflects scattered torchlight beneath gathering clouds. The city behind her murmurs with fear and exhaustion. She knows the world she fought to preserve is ending. Antony dies first after military collapse and devastating false rumours. Cleopatra follows soon after. Ancient stories claim suicide by Aspi bite. Modern historians debate endlessly. No clear certainty survives. Only tragedy. And with her death in 30 BCE, Egypt finally becomes a Roman province. The last pharaoh is gone. Yet even now, beneath conquest and empire and loss, the Nile still moves patiently through the darkness toward the sea exactly as it always has. The temple doors open reluctantly now. Sand gathers against the lower steps while faded paint flakes softly from ancient walls once bright as sunrise. Inside, a handful of Aegean priests move through rituals performed for centuries beyond counting. Their voices echo quietly through vast stone halls built for crowds that no longer come. Egypt is becoming memory. Not suddenly, not cleanly, slowly. After Cleopatra's death, Roman rule settles across the Nile Valley with practiced administrative efficiency. Egypt becomes one of the empire's most valuable provinces, especially for grain production. Roman officials govern carefully because Rome itself depends heavily upon Egyptian harvests to feed its enormous population. The Nile still matters immensely, but Egypt no longer directs its own destiny. You travel through Alexandria during the early Roman period, where imperial banners hang beside older Greek monuments beneath sharp Mediterranean sunlight. The city remains intellectually dazzling. Scholars continue debating astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and mathematics inside crowded lecture halls and libraries. Yet something feels altered emotionally. Confidence has shifted elsewhere now, toward Rome, toward emperors across the sea. Egypt increasingly becomes a place admired for age rather than feared for power. Tourists arrive seeking ancient wonders even during antiquity itself. Wealthy Romans visit temples, pyramids, and tombs with fascinated curiosity. Some carve graffiti onto monuments already thousands of years old. One Roman traveller scratches his name beside a temple entrance and proudly notes he visited the works of the ancients. The ancients, from his perspective, are already ancient. That detail always feels strangely moving. You stand at Giza beside Roman visitors staring upward at the pyramids, while desert wind pushes sand softly around their sandals. One woman shields her eyes against the sun and whispers that human beings should not be able to build such things. Honestly, she sounds exactly like modern tourists. Certain reactions transcend centuries. Roman emperors themselves become fascinated by Egyptian symbolism. Obelisks travel across the Mediterranean to decorate Roman cities. Egyptian gods merge gradually with Greco-Roman religious traditions. The goddess Isis gains followers far beyond the Nile Valley. Cultures survive through adaptation as much as preservation. Yet traditional Egyptian religion slowly weakens beneath changing political and social realities. Temples lose funding gradually. Priestly authority diminishes. Ancient hieroglyphic writing becomes increasingly specialized and obscure. Fewer people can still read the old sacred texts properly. That loss feels especially tragic. Imagine watching your civilization's language become inaccessible even to its own descendants. At Philae Temple near Egypt's southern border, priests continue honouring Isis with remarkable devotion long after many other ancient traditions fade. The temple complex rises beautifully from the Nile beneath warm, golden light. Palm trees sway gently beside stone columns carved with hieroglyphs few visitors fully understand anymore. The rituals continue partly through habit, partly through faith, partly through stubbornness. Human beings often preserve disappearing worlds through routine long after hope fades. You sit beside an elderly temple scribe carefully copying sacred inscriptions onto papyrus despite worsening eyesight. His hands tremble slightly while working by oil lamp late into the evening. He knows fewer apprentices arrive each year. People prefer Greek now, he says quietly. There is no bitterness in his voice, only exhaustion. Meanwhile, Christianity begins spreading across Egypt during the 1st century CE. At first, the new religion exists alongside older beliefs within crowded cities like Alexandria. Debates become fierce. Philosophers argue publicly about theology while bishops compete for influence. Then gradually, the balance shifts. Christian communities grow larger and more organized. Traditional temples face increasing hostility from imperial authorities after Rome itself embraces Christianity under Constantine. The old gods become politically dangerous. You travel through rural Egypt where ancient shrines stand abandoned beside newer churches built from reused temple stones. Crosses appear carved over faded pagan imagery. Monks withdraw into desert communities seeking spiritual purity far from urban corruption. The irony feels impossible to ignore. The same desert once associated with death and chaos now becomes sacred refuge for Christian ascetics. One monk lives alone inside a former tomb chamber west of the Nile. The walls around him still display painted scenes of ancient afterlife journeys. He prays beside imagery belonging to a religion he rejects completely. History layers itself strangely sometimes. Not all transition happen peacefully. Certain temples close violently. Statues shatter beneath organized destruction. Priests lose livelihoods built across generations. Sacred knowledge disappears when libraries decay or burn. And slowly, hieroglyphs fall silent. The last known hieroglyphic inscription is carved at Philae in 394 CE. Think about that for a moment. For over 3,000 years, Egyptians wrote their world into stone using sacred symbols carrying kingship, prayer, memory, and identity across unimaginable stretches of time. Then one day someone carves the final inscription, and afterward, nobody remembers how to read them anymore. That silence lasts nearly 14 centuries. You walk through abandoned temple corridors where bats flutter suddenly from dark ceilings disturbed by your footsteps. Wind blows sand across floors once polished smooth by generations of priests and worshippers. The air smells dry and forgotten, yet Egypt never truly disappears. Travellers continue visiting. Stories continue circulating. Ruins continue astonishing people. Arab conquerors arrive in the 7th century bringing new language, religion, and political systems. Cairo eventually rises near the Nile, vibrant and alive beside the remains of far older civilizations. Medieval scholars study ancient monuments with fascination and confusion. Some believe the pyramids store hidden wisdom. Others imagine giants built them before the biblical flood. Human imagination rushes naturally into silence left by lost knowledge. Centuries pass. Desert sands bury certain ruins completely while preserving the accidentally. Tombs remain sealed beneath cliffs. Temples vanish beneath villages and farmland. Statues lose faces to weather and time. Then in 1798, Napoleon invades Egypt, and suddenly Europe rediscovers ancient Egypt with obsessive intensity. Scholars accompany the French armies sketching monuments, copying inscriptions, cataloguing ruins. Later, the Rosetta Stone allows Jean-François Champollion to finally decipher hieroglyphs in the 19th century. The dead begin speaking again, That moment feels miraculous. Imagine staring at silent symbols for centuries and then suddenly hearing recognizable human voices emerge from the stone. Love letters, tax records, prayers, jokes, funeral texts, ordinary complaints. Civilizations return to life through language. Tonight you stand beside the Nile beneath cool darkness, while distant city lights shimmer across the water. Somewhere beyond the horizon, tourists still wander through temples and museums searching for connection with people dead for thousands of years. And somehow, against all odds, the connection remains possible, because ancient Egypt survives not only through monuments, but through the stubborn human desire to be remembered after the silence comes. Night settles over the Nile exactly as it did 5,000 years ago. The river darkens beneath the stars while reeds whisper softly along the banks. Somewhere far away, a dog barks once across the water. Palm trees move gently in the warm breeze. The smell of damp earth rises after evening cooling, familiar and ancient beyond language itself. And somehow, after everything, Egypt still feels alive. You have travelled through thousands of years beside this river now. You have stood among the first farming villages where frightened families watched uncertain floodwaters rise beneath the moon. You have crossed deserts beside labourers hauling stone toward impossible monuments. You have walked through palaces heavy with perfume, ambition, and whispered betrayal. You have watched kings become gods, and gods become memories. You've seen revolutions bloom beneath sunlight and collapse back into dust. Armies march north beneath bronze banners. Priests chant beside incense smoke drifting through temple halls. Grieving families place bread beside their dead because love refuses practicality. And through all of it, the Nile continues moving patiently toward the sea. That may be the deepest truth ancient Egypt leaves behind. Not permanence, continuity. The Egyptians understood something many civilizations struggle to accept. Human life feels fragile partly because it is fragile. Floods fail, dynasties collapse, bodies weaken, names disappear, entire religions fall silent. Even the greatest kingdoms eventually become ruins visited by strangers carrying cameras and bottled water beneath the desert sun. Yet the Egyptians never stopped trying to preserve meaning anyway. There is something profoundly moving about that refusal. You stand now inside the ruins of Karnak long after the tourists have gone home for the evening. The massive columns glow faintly beneath moonlight while bats flicker through the darkness overhead. Wind moves softly across carved hieroglyphs once painted in brilliant colour. Every surface around you was created by human hands. Hands that trembled sometimes, hands that ached, hands that buried children, wrote letters, prepared meals, repaired roofs, touched lovers, carried water, held tools. History often reduces civilizations into abstractions, but civilizations are really collections of exhausted ordinary people trying to survive long enough for tomorrow to arrive. Ancient Egypt lasted so long partly because its people became extraordinarily skilled at building continuity from repetition. Flood seasons returned, rituals returned, sunrise returned, bread baking beside the river returned. Routine became sacred. You think about the tomb workers at Deir el-Medina, complaining about grain rations beneath the same stars shining above you now. You think about the little girl carrying her linen doll proudly through dusty village streets, about the aging priest at Philae copying sacred words no one would soon understand anymore. None of them imagined future centuries would remember them. And yet here they are, still lingering somehow inside the silence. Perhaps that is why ancient Egypt feels emotionally different from many other lost civilizations. The monuments impress you, certainly. The pyramids remain astonishing. The temples still overwhelm the senses with scale and beauty. But the emotional weight comes from smaller things. A fingerprint pressed accidentally into wet clay. A joke scratched onto a worker's practice tablet. A worn walking staff buried beside a dead king. A mother pretending she is not hungry so her children can eat more. Human details survive where certainty does not. You walk slowly toward the riverbank while cool night air settles against your skin. Frogs pulse rhythmically from the reeds. The Nile smells dark and alive beneath the stars. Boats drift quietly in the distance, carrying soft lantern light across black water. For the ancient Egyptians, the river represented more than geography. It became a model for existence itself. Life moved in cycles. Death was not final disappearance but transition. Every sunset carried promise of another dawn somewhere beyond the horizon. That belief comforted them, and frightened them too, because the afterlife still required judgment, memory, preparation, moral balance. Even eternity demanded effort. Perhaps that feels familiar because modern people are not so different after all. You still build monuments now, only shaped differently. You still fear being forgotten. You still search for meaning inside fragile temporary lives. And maybe that is why these ancient voices continue reaching across thousands of years so powerfully. The language changes. The clothing changes. Empires rise and collapse. But the emotional landscape remains recognizable. Love, fear, ambition, grief, exhaustion, hope. The same currents keep flowing through humanity exactly as the Nile flows through Egypt. Tonight the pyramids still stand against the desert edge beneath cold starlight. Their builders are gone. Their kings are gone. Their gods sleep quietly inside museums, books, ruins, and memory. Yet somehow the civilization endures anyway. Not because stone lasts forever. Nothing lasts forever. It endures because people continue returning to these stories, searching for pieces of themselves hidden inside the ancient darkness beside the river. And perhaps you found something there too tonight. Maybe only a mood. Maybe a question. Maybe simply the strange comfort of knowing that countless human beings lived, feared, loved, struggled, and hoped long before your own brief moment beneath the stars. The Nile keeps flowing. The night keeps deepening, and history keeps whispering softly to anyone willing to listen closely enough. Sleep well, my friend. Word count 1015. Thank you for travelling beside the Nile tonight through the long and haunted story of ancient Egypt. If certain moments stayed with you, perhaps share them below. Maybe it was the silence inside the tombs, the workers beneath the pyramids, Cleopatra watching Alexandria fade into darkness, or simply the sound of river water moving through history while empires rose and vanished beside it. I would genuinely love to know which part of the journey felt most alive to you, and if these quiet walks through the ancient world help you rest, reflect, or escape the noise of modern life for a little while. There are many more waiting ahead. Other rivers, other forgotten kingdoms, other human voices still echoing softly through time. Until then, may your night be peaceful, your dreams gentle, and your thoughts carried somewhere calm beneath distant stars. Blessings to you and your family.